In today's fast-paced world, falling asleep with a calm mind can be hard. But the gentle wisdom of the Buddha reminds us that peace is always close, just a breath away. These peaceful Buddha stories are made to help you relax, let go of your worries, and slowly drift into deep sleep. Each story brings a quiet lesson to calm your thoughts and warm your heart. As you listen, you may feel your body soften and your mind become still, reminding you that true rest begins inside. The Bamboo Whisper of Bodh Gaya. In the quiet outskirts of Bodh Gaya, near the sacred Bodhi tree, there was a hidden grove of bamboo. The locals believed it whispered ancient truths to those who truly listened. Long ago, a young seeker named Anil arrived, not in search of wealth or praise, but for peace, a kind of stillness he could not seem to find within himself. His heart was full of noise, his thoughts raced from one worry to the next. No teaching, no chant, no practice seemed to ease his mind. One late afternoon, weary from his restlessness, Anil wandered into the bamboo grove. The sun was sinking low, casting soft light through the tall, slender stalks. The world felt slower here, quieter. He sat beneath one of the tallest bamboo stalks and closed his eyes. At first, he could only hear what was obvious: the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of a bird, his own uneven breath. But the longer he sat, the more something else began to surface. The bamboo swayed gently in the wind, creaking in rhythm, as if it breathed with the earth. It didn't speak, and yet Anil felt he was being spoken to, not with words, but with feeling, deep, still, and calm. He stayed there for a long time, doing nothing, not meditating, not thinking, just sitting and being. And slowly, without trying, something within him began to soften. The tightness in his chest eased. The thoughts that had clung to him started to fall away, like dry leaves drifting to the ground. That night, Anil slept near the grove beneath the stars, wrapped in silence. When he woke, he felt lighter. The storm in his heart had passed, not because it had been solved, but because it had been seen, held, heard. He returned many times, no longer chasing peace, but simply allowing it. He learned not from words or lectures, but from the quiet companionship of the bamboo. And over time, the grove became his teacher. Lesson of the story: stillness can speak louder than words. When we listen closely, even silence can teach us peace. The lotus that bloomed at midnight. Long ago, in a remote village nestled between rivers and forest, there was a quiet pond hidden from view. No one visited it, for it was said to be cursed. The villagers claimed nothing bloomed there. The water was still, too still, and the night air around it too cold. But an old monk named Suman, traveling through the land, was drawn to the pond after hearing the whispers of its silence. He came alone under the cover of night, his footsteps soft on the damp earth. The moon was veiled behind clouds, and the path was lit only by starlight. Suman didn't fear the pond's stillness. He welcomed it. For years he had wandered, teaching, healing, and listening, but now he sought nothing. Just rest, just truth, in whatever form it chose to reveal itself. He sat at the edge of the pond, unmoving, his eyes gently closed. Hours passed. The wind stirred, then calmed. Owls called from distant trees. A single frog croaked, and fell quiet again. And in the deep silence of midnight, something extraordinary happened. A soft ripple touched the surface of the water. Suman opened his eyes slowly, and there, in the middle of the dark pond, a lotus began to rise. Petal by petal, it unfolded in complete stillness. No light guided it, no sun fed it. Yet it opened with quiet strength, pure and pale, reflecting the stars above. Its beauty was not for the world to see. It was not rushed. It needed no witness. It bloomed simply because it was time. The monk watched with tears in his eyes, not of sorrow, but of understanding. The lotus had waited, not for approval, not for applause, but for the right moment, hidden and sacred. He bowed deeply, not to the flower, but to what it had shown him. In our darkest, stillest moments, when we feel most unseen, most forgotten, something deep within us may also be blooming, slowly, quietly, not for others, but for ourselves. Lesson of the story: true growth often happens in silence. Like the lotus that blooms at midnight, our inner beauty unfolds when we honor our own timing, not the world's. Siddhartha's silence beneath the stars. It was a quiet night in the forest near the banks of the Nairanjana River. The moon hung low, casting a soft silver glow across the earth. The air was still, the world hushed. Alone beneath the vast sky, Siddhartha sat, his legs crossed, his eyes gently closed. He had given up wealth, power, even comfort. He had wandered for years, seeking truth in teachings, in suffering, in silence. Now, there was nothing left to seek, only to be. The stars above blinked slowly in the sky, ancient and unbothered by the affairs of men. As Siddhartha breathed in and out, he didn't chase answers. He didn't resist the questions. His heart no longer ached for a final teaching, nor did his mind strain to understand the nature of all things. He simply sat, listening to the silence between the sounds, the rustling of leaves, the gentle hum of nighttime life, the movement of his breath. And in that space, something shifted, not suddenly, but like a door slowly creaking open inside the soul. A deep calm began to rise within him, not born from effort, but from surrender. The world didn't disappear. It simply became soft, gentle. Each thought that once pulled at him now passed like a cloud across the night sky. He looked up at the stars, now wide awake and shimmering above the treetops. They didn't speak, but he felt as if they welcomed him, not as a prince, not as a seeker, not as a monk, but just as he was, still, present, whole. He realized then that silence was not the absence of sound. It was a space where truth could echo, where peace could live. It was in the stillness that he saw most clearly, not with his eyes, but with something deeper. He did not rise quickly. He did not declare any great revelation. He simply remained beneath the stars in a silence that held the entire universe inside it. Lesson of the story: peace doesn't come from answers. It comes from presence. In stillness, beneath the stars, we remember who we are beyond thought, beyond striving. Silence is not empty. It is full of everything we truly need. The sandalwood path. In the heart of a dense forest, where the air was thick with the scent of earth and life, there lay a hidden path known only to a few wandering monks. It was narrow, soft beneath the feet, and lined with old sandalwood trees that reached toward the sky. Travelers said the path felt different, as if it remembered every step, every prayer, every sorrow that had ever passed through. One day, a weary traveler named Rahi stumbled upon the entrance while searching for a quicker way home. He was tired, both in body and spirit. His life in the village had grown heavy with arguments, expectations, and endless tasks that seemed to lead nowhere. Something in him had broken open that morning, and so he walked, not knowing where he was going, only that he needed to go. As he entered the sandalwood path, a calm fell over him like mist. The air grew warmer, the wind slowed, even the birds sounded softer. He noticed the ground felt different here, springy, gentle. The smell of sandalwood hung in the air, sweet and grounding. He walked slowly at first, then paused, unsure why his chest ached without pain. It felt like remembering something long forgotten. Further along, he found small offerings left by those who came before. A folded prayer, a stone shaped like a heart, a single white feather resting on a flat rock. Each one seemed to whisper without words, "You are not alone." With each step, the noise in his mind began to quiet. The worries that had chased him no longer felt sharp. The burdens of his life didn't vanish, but they softened, as if they had become lighter, easier to carry. He sat beneath one of the trees, closed his eyes, and let the warmth of the wood behind him support his spine. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to solve anything. There were no signs, no lessons carved in stone, just stillness, just the quiet wisdom of the path itself. He stayed until the stars blinked through the canopy, and when he rose to leave, the forest gently welcomed his return. He walked back the way he came, but something in him had changed. Lesson of the story: healing doesn't always come through answers. Sometimes it comes simply by walking, slowly, gently, through a space that holds us without judgment. Like the scent of sandalwood, peace lingers long after the path is gone. The bell that rang without sound. In a distant mountain monastery, hidden among the clouds and pines, there was a legend of a bell that had never been struck, yet rang in the hearts of those who listened. Many monks had heard the story, but none had truly believed it. How could a bell ring without sound? Still, the bell tower stood tall, and within it, a great bronze bell, untouched by time, unmoved by hand. A young novice named Tenzin arrived at the monastery, full of questions. He wanted to learn quickly, to reach enlightenment fast, to feel peace immediately. Every day he meditated with effort, listened hard, and waited for something to change. But his thoughts stayed loud, and his heart restless. One evening, after yet another long sit in the meditation hall, Tenzin wandered toward the bell tower. The air was cool, and the sky had just turned violet with dusk. He climbed the old wooden stairs and stood before the silent bell. It was massive and beautiful, carved with symbols and stories in a language older than memory. He stood still. He waited. He listened. There was no wind, no chant, no movement, only breath. And then nothing happened. But something within him did. The silence became thick, alive, holding him like an embrace. He realized he wasn't waiting for the bell anymore. He wasn't hoping for a sign. For once, he was just being. He could feel the weight of his feet on the wood, the rise and fall of his chest, the soft pulse in his fingertips. It was all so quiet, so full, and in that fullness he felt something, heard something, not with his ears, but with his whole being. A deep, clear presence. Not a sound, but a knowing, as if the bell had rung somewhere inside him. Tenzin didn't move for a long time. He didn't need to. The bell had done its work without ever making a sound. Lesson of the story. Not all awakenings come through noise or action. Some truths are heard only in silence. The deepest wisdom rings within us when we stop waiting, stop reaching, and simply listen. The deer who listened. In the cool shade of a forest clearing, not far from where the Buddha once walked, lived a gentle deer named Anu. Unlike the other deer who leapt and played, Anu spent her days quietly watching the world. She didn't speak much. While others raced through the tall grass or argued over fallen fruit, Anu stood still, ears turned toward the wind, eyes wide with calm. Many animals didn't understand her silence. Some thought she was shy, others thought her strange. But Anu wasn't lonely, she was listening. One morning, a young monk named Tissa wandered into the clearing. His robes were dusty, his shoulders tense. He had left the monastery in frustration after failing again to still his thoughts during meditation. The harder he tried to quiet his mind, the louder it seemed to become. He felt ashamed, like he wasn't meant for the path he had chosen. Tissa sat on a large stone, placing his head in his hands. He let out a long sigh, unaware that Anu stood just a few steps away. He noticed her only when he looked up and met her soft, unblinking gaze. She didn't run. She didn't move. She simply stood there, as if offering something he couldn't name. Out of habit, Tissa began to speak, not to be heard, but to release the thoughts knotted inside him. He spoke of his struggle, his fear, his doubt. The words spilled out like water from a jar. Anu stayed. She didn't blink. She didn't turn away. She just listened. And something extraordinary happened. Tissa's voice slowed. His breathing softened. As he looked into the eyes of the deer, he saw no judgment, no expectation, only presence, quiet, patient presence. He sat with her for a long time, not meditating, not reciting prayers, just breathing in the stillness they shared. Eventually, Anu turned and walked calmly back into the trees. Tissa didn't try to follow. He didn't need to. He felt lighter, not because someone had solved his problems, but because someone had truly listened, even without words. Lesson of the story. Sometimes the deepest healing comes not from advice, but from presence. Like the deer who listened, we can offer peace simply by being fully there, with open hearts and quiet understanding. The monk and the feather. In a quiet village, nestled between soft hills and wide skies, there lived an old monk named Damo. He was known not for great teachings or long sermons, but for his calm presence. People said he carried peace like a candle, never too bright, never too dim, but always steady. Damo spoke little. He simply walked, listened, smiled, and helped where help was needed. One morning, a young traveler named Rin came to him. Her voice trembled with frustration. "I've read the teachings, sat in silence, followed the breath, but my thoughts are heavy. My past clings to me like wet cloth. I don't feel light. I don't feel free." Damo said nothing. Instead, he reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a single feather, white, soft, barely touched by the breeze. He handed it to her and began walking toward the edge of the village. Curious, Rin followed. They walked through fields and trees, the silence between them comfortable but full. After some time, Damo stopped at a small clearing. A breeze passed through, gentle and warm. He turned to Rin and held up the feather. "Let it go," he said softly. She looked at him, confused. "That's it?" He nodded. So she let it go. The feather floated for a moment, lifted by the wind, danced in the air, then slowly drifted down. It landed softly on the ground, untouched, unharmed. Damo looked at her. "That's how we hold our pain, our memories, our thoughts. We cling to them, believing they are part of us. But they are like feathers, meant to be released, not carried forever." Rin stared at the feather. It didn't fall with force. It didn't fight the air. It simply surrendered. In that quiet clearing, something inside her loosened. She felt the weight she'd been carrying, not physically, but in her heart. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to explain, to fix, or to prove anything. She simply breathed, and the breath felt light. Lesson of the story: letting go does not mean losing. It means trusting. When we release what no longer serves us, we make space for peace. Like a feather on the wind, freedom begins when we stop holding on. Tea under the banyan tree. In a quiet village nestled between hills and rice fields, there stood an ancient banyan tree whose roots touched both sky and earth. Its wide branches offered shade, and beneath it sat an old monk named Bhanu, known not for grand teachings or powerful words, but for something much simpler: his tea. Every morning, Bhanu would light a small fire, heat water in a dented metal pot, and gently brew tea with leaves he gathered himself. He would pour it into mismatched cups and wait, not for students, not for followers, just for whoever happened to come. People didn't come to learn, they came to feel something they couldn't explain. One day, a tired woman named Mira arrived at the tree. Her eyes were heavy, her shoulders drooped with grief. She had lost someone dear to her, and though many had offered words, none had touched the ache in her chest. She didn't speak when she arrived. She just sat. Bhanu smiled softly and poured her a cup of tea. They sat in silence. The only sounds were the birds above, the wind in the leaves, and the quiet clink of the cup in her hand. Mira didn't expect the tea to change anything, but as the warm liquid touched her lips, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just a small warmth that moved through her, a sense of being held by the moment, not judged, not rushed. Bhanu didn't ask about her pain. He didn't offer wisdom or scriptures. He just poured more tea when her cup was empty, his hands steady, his presence calm. As the sun shifted across the sky, Mira began to cry. Not the loud, desperate kind, but soft tears that slid down her cheeks like rain on dry earth. Bhanu simply nodded, as if to say, "It's okay. Let it come. Let it go." They sat until the light grew golden and long. When Mira finally stood to leave, She didn't feel healed, but she felt seen, and that was enough. She bowed to Bhanu, and he bowed back. Lesson of the story: peace doesn't always come through answers or effort. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet of shared presence, in the steam of a warm cup, beneath the branches of a tree that simply holds space for everything we carry. A bowl of moonlight. In a small, quiet monastery perched above a lake, the monks lived simply, waking with the sun, walking in silence, eating from their alms bowls, and watching the seasons pass like slow-moving clouds. Among them was an elderly monk named Anshu, whose gentle nature and kind eyes made even the wild birds feel safe near him. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words stayed with you like the warmth of morning tea. One evening, a young monk named Kavi sat beside Anshu, restless and full of questions. "Master," he said softly, "why do I still feel empty? I meditate, I follow the path, I do everything I've been taught, but this hollowness inside me never leaves." Anshu listened without speaking. The moon had risen high over the lake, its reflection shimmering in the still water. After a long pause, Anshu took his empty alms bowl and walked down to the edge of the lake. Kavi followed, confused but curious. Without a word, Anshu bent down and scooped water into the bowl. The surface settled, and the moon's reflection appeared, bright and whole, floating gently in the curved basin. He held it out to Kavi. "Look," he said. Kavi gazed into the bowl. The moon looked close enough to touch, but he knew it wasn't real. It was only an image, resting quietly in water. "Is this the moon?" Anshu asked. Kavi shook his head. "No, master. It's only a reflection." Anshu nodded. "Just like your emptiness." The breeze stirred the water, and the moon's image broke into shimmering ripples. "What you feel is not the truth," Anshu said. "It is a reflection of thoughts, stirred by the wind of your mind. When you stop chasing meaning, stop fearing the hollow, the stillness will return, and in that stillness, you'll see clearly." Kavi looked down again. As the wind faded, the water stilled, and the moon reappeared, perfect and quiet, just as before. That night, Kavi didn't find all the answers he was looking for, but for the first time, he didn't need them. He carried his bowl back to the monastery, not as something empty, but as something open. Lesson of the story: emptiness is not absence, it is space. Like a still bowl holding the moon, peace comes when we stop chasing reflections and learn to rest in what is. The leaf that floated to enlightenment. Deep in the hills of Kosambi, a small stream wound its way through the forest, singing a quiet song to the trees. It wasn't grand or mighty like a river, but it moved with gentle purpose, never forcing, never rushing. One autumn morning, a single golden leaf broke free from a high branch and began to fall. It danced slowly through the air, turning, pausing, drifting until it touched the surface of the stream. The leaf didn't fight the water. It didn't sink. It simply floated, held by the gentle current, carried without effort. The stream knew where it was going, even if the leaf did not. Further upstream, a novice monk named Danu sat cross-legged on a flat rock, deep in frustration. For weeks, he had tried to reach deeper states of meditation, to understand the teachings of the Buddha, to find clarity and peace. But his thoughts moved too fast. His heart felt tight. He had scolded himself, pushed himself, and now sat in silence, feeling more lost than ever. As he opened his eyes in defeat, he noticed the golden leaf floating toward him. It moved so slowly, carried by the softest ripples. It spun a little, then paused, then drifted again. Danu watched it, mesmerized. The leaf didn't try to go faster. It didn't resist where the stream led it. It trusted the flow. And yet, it was still moving, still becoming, still arriving. The monk's breath deepened. Something inside him began to soften. He realized how hard he had been trying to force his mind into stillness, to push himself into understanding, as if enlightenment were a destination reached through effort alone. But the leaf was teaching him something else. It showed him that surrender is not giving up. It is giving in to the moment, letting go of the need to control, to hurry, to grasp. The leaf floated past him, its journey continuing. Danu bowed his head to it as if it were the Buddha himself. Lesson of the story. Sometimes the path to peace is not in doing more, but in letting go. Like the leaf that floated to enlightenment, we awaken not by force, but by allowing life to carry us gently, moment by moment, into truth. The cloud that never argued. There was once a young monk named Yoru who struggled with his thoughts. He tried to be kind, to be calm, to follow the Buddha's teachings, but inside his mind often raced. When others disagreed with him, he felt angry. When people ignored him, he felt small. He believed that if he could just convince others, if he could explain more clearly or be more right, the tension in his chest would finally ease. One morning, after a heated discussion during temple chores, Yoru sat alone beneath the open sky. His heart was tight and his breath uneven. He watched the clouds drift above the mountains, hoping they might bring him peace. That's when the old head monk, Master Rinzin, joined him, slowly, quietly, like wind arriving without warning. He didn't speak right away. He only looked up at the sky with soft eyes. "Do you see that cloud?" Rinzin finally asked, pointing to one drifting slowly across the blue. Yoru nodded. "Yes." "Does it argue with the wind?" Yoru blinked. "No." "Does it stop moving just because the sky changes?" "No." Rinzin smiled gently. "It simply moves. It changes shape. It floats. It lets the world be what it is. No resistance. No control. Just being." Yoru looked back up at the cloud. It had changed since he first saw it. No longer the same shape, no longer in the same place. And yet, it hadn't fought to stay still. It hadn't tried to prove itself. It simply was, and that was enough. "You," Rinzin said, placing a hand on Yoru's shoulder, "are trying to hold the sky still with your thoughts. But peace does not come from being right. It comes from letting go." The wind brushed over the grass, and above them the cloud drifted on, silent, soft, at peace with every passing moment. Yoru lowered his head and closed his eyes. For the first time in days, his breath came easily. Lesson of the story. Peace begins when we stop needing to win. Like the cloud that never argued, we find freedom not in control, but in letting life move through us without resistance. The cracked pot's secret smile. In a quiet village where the mornings began with temple bells and the scent of jasmine, an old water-bearer walked each day to the river. Balanced across his shoulders was a wooden pole with 2 clay pots hanging from either end. One pot was perfect, smooth, polished, and proud. The other had a long crack down its side, barely holding together after many seasons of use. Every morning, the water-bearer filled both pots and walked the long path home. By the time he reached his door, the cracked pot had leaked nearly half its water. It felt ashamed. While the perfect pot held its full portion, the cracked one believed it had failed. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with orange and gold, the cracked pot finally spoke. "I'm sorry," it whispered, its voice heavy with sadness. "Each day I lose water. I am broken, useless." The old man paused. He looked kindly at the pot and said, "Tomorrow, as we walk, I want you to look at your side of the path." The next day, the pot did as it was told. As the man walked home from the river, the cracked pot noticed something it had never seen before. Along the path on its side bloomed a line of wildflowers, bright yellow, soft violet, glowing white. They stretched joyfully toward the sky, their petals kissed by sunlight. "I planted seeds there long ago," the water-bearer said softly, "and every day, as you leaked, you watered them. That crack you carry has brought beauty into the world, beauty the perfect pot could never create." The cracked pot was silent, but something within it shifted, a warmth it hadn't known. It had been so focused on what it lost, it had never seen what it gave. From that day on, it didn't try to hold more water. It simply smiled, quietly, as the flowers bloomed beside it, day after day. Lesson of the story. What we see as broken in ourselves may be the very thing through which beauty flows. Like the cracked pot, we each carry imperfections, but often they're not flaws. They're gifts in disguise, gently watering the world in ways we cannot always see. A candle in the windless room. In a remote monastery carved into the side of a quiet mountain, there was a single room that remained undisturbed for generations. It had no windows, only a small opening above to let in a sliver of sunlight during the day. The monks called it the windless room. It was where they went not to speak, not to study, but to feel, to sit with themselves and listen without distraction. A young monk named Lailan had heard many stories about this room. He believed it held a special kind of peace, maybe even a secret to enlightenment. So one morning, after struggling with weeks of inner restlessness, of doubt, sadness, and the feeling of being lost, he asked the abbot for permission to sit inside. The abbot agreed with a nod and handed Lailan a single candle. "You may light this when you're ready," he said, "and see what it shows you." Lailan entered the room and closed the heavy wooden door behind him. The silence was immediate, thick like a warm blanket. He lit the candle and placed it before him. Its flame stood tall, steady, unshaken by wind or movement. He sat in front of it, watching. At first, his thoughts came loud. Memories, regrets, worries, hopes. But the candle didn't flicker. It burned with quiet strength, never shrinking, never flaring. As the hours passed, Lilan's mind slowly began to mirror the candle's stillness. He noticed how the flame didn't try to be noticed. It simply was. It didn't try to burn brighter to prove its worth. It didn't fear the dark. It simply offered light, soft, constant, and without effort. Lilan felt something in his chest loosen. He had been chasing peace like a bird flapping against glass, trying harder and harder to escape his own mind. But this candle taught him a different way. Not to escape, not to fight, but to be without needing to prove, change, or explain. The room, the silence, the flame, they didn't offer answers. They offered presence. Lilan sat longer than he had planned, the candle burning low but steady, his breath and heart in quiet rhythm with it. Lesson of the story. True peace doesn't come from silence around us, but stillness within us. Like a candle in a windless room, we shine most when we stop struggling and simply remain. The temple that dreamed. High on a quiet mountain, where clouds often rested like blankets over the trees, there stood an ancient temple. It had no name carved into its stone, and no monks walked its halls anymore. Its roof was cracked, vines wrapped gently around its pillars, and wind moved through its open doors as if it too were part of the temple's breath. And yet, even without people, the temple still dreamed. At night, the moonlight spilled through its broken windows and touched the floor like soft fingers. Stars blinked above, and the wind hummed softly through the walls. In these still hours, the temple remembered. It remembered the sound of laughter when young monks swept its floors. It remembered prayers whispered under the breath of early morning. It remembered a single candle that once flickered for days without going out, kept alive by a monk who had vowed never to let it die while he was awake. One night, as the stars shimmered brighter than usual, a lost traveler named Ravi stumbled up the mountain path, cold and unsure of where he was going. His mind was heavy with questions, the kind that grow louder the longer they are unanswered. He had tried many teachings, many paths, but none had brought him the peace he longed for. Then he saw the temple, its outline barely visible through the mist. He entered, expecting silence and emptiness, but what he felt was something else. The air inside was warm despite the night. He sat down where the old prayer mat still rested. No words came to him, and none were needed. He simply breathed. For the first time in many months, he didn't think. He didn't try, he just was. And in the hush of the moment, he felt it. The temple wasn't just stone and wood. It held memory, presence, spirit. It welcomed him like an old friend who had waited patiently, never asking why he took so long to return. He stayed through the night, wrapped in silence, surrounded by peace he could not explain. Lesson of the story. Sometimes the places we forget still remember us. Peace lives not in new answers, but in quiet spaces that hold us just as we are. Even an empty temple can dream and help us remember our own. The silence between raindrops. It had been raining for days in the hills where the monastery sat, wrapped in mist and moss. The sound of water was everywhere, dripping from rooftops, flowing down stone steps, tapping gently on bamboo leaves. Some of the younger monks grew tired of the wetness and gloom. They longed for sun, for warmth, for the cheerful lightness that the rain seemed to wash away. One of them, a novice named Sato, felt the weight of the clouds most heavily. He was quiet by nature, thoughtful and kind, but lately he had felt lost in his own mind. His thoughts were noisy, pulling him in many directions. He tried to meditate, but the rain made it harder. It filled his ears, his thoughts, and soon even his dreams. One grey morning, he approached the temple teacher, a gentle monk named Tashi, who was sweeping water from the stone walkway with slow, deliberate movements. "Master," Sato said, "I cannot find peace. Even in meditation, the rain distracts me. There's too much noise. I don't know how to quiet my mind." Tashi looked up, his face calm and unbothered. "Come," he said, "let us listen together." They sat on the covered porch, side by side, facing the garden. Rain fell steadily, softly. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Tashi said, "Do you hear the rain?" "Yes," Sato replied. "What do you hear between the drops?" Sato furrowed his brow. "Nothing, just more rain." Tashi smiled gently. "Exactly." They sat longer, and slowly, Sato began to notice something he hadn't before. Not the sound of the rain, but the space around it. The tiny pauses between each drop on the roof. The rhythm that had always been there, but never noticed. It wasn't empty. It was full of stillness, a soft silence that made the rain more beautiful. That gave the sound its shape. In that quiet space between the raindrops, Sato's thoughts began to slow, not by force, but by gentle awareness. He didn't need the rain to stop. He just needed to listen deeper. And there, wrapped in water and silence, peace found him. Lesson of the story: stillness isn't the absence of sound, it's the space within it. When we learn to listen to the silence between raindrops, we begin to hear the peace that was always waiting inside us. Buddha and the blanket of snow. One winter, the hills near Sarnath were covered in a deep, white silence. Snow had fallen all night, soft and steady, turning the earth into a quiet world of stillness. Trees stood draped in white, their branches heavy yet graceful. Birds were hidden. The wind barely moved. Even the river nearby flowed beneath a thin skin of ice, as if it, too, had paused to listen. The Buddha had been staying nearby, in a small shelter built by monks. Though the others stayed indoors that morning, warming their hands over small fires, the Buddha stepped outside barefoot, wearing only his robe. He walked slowly, each step leaving a perfect imprint in the snow. No one stopped him. They watched in silence as he disappeared into the white forest. He walked until he came to a small clearing where the snow was untouched. There, he sat beneath a large sal tree, its branches dusted with snow. His breath rose gently into the cold air, and his body remained still. Snow began to fall again, soft flakes landing on his shoulders, his lap, his head, but he did not move. From a distance, a young monk named Ananda watched with worry. "Why does he sit there in the cold?" he whispered. "He will freeze." Still, the Buddha did not shiver. He did not resist. He simply sat. As the snow wrapped around him like a soft blanket, his face remained peaceful, his eyes closed, his body calm. Hours passed. The wind picked up, then faded. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting pale light across the forest. Finally, the Buddha opened his eyes and stood, snow falling gently from his robe. He returned to the shelter, his feet wet, but his steps light. Ananda ran to him. "Weren't you cold, Master?" The Buddha smiled gently. "Coldness is outside," he said, "but inside there is warmth that cannot be touched by wind or snow." Ananda didn't fully understand, but he felt something shift inside him, a quiet knowing, like the first warmth of spring beneath the snow. Lesson of the story: peace is not found by avoiding discomfort. It is found by being still within it. Like snow resting on the earth, even life's coldest moments can offer deep calm when we stop resisting and simply allow them to pass. The cat who watched meditation. In a sunlit courtyard of a quiet monastery, a stray cat began to appear every morning. No one knew where it came from. It did not beg for food, nor did it seek attention. It simply arrived at dawn, circled the meditation hall once, and then sat perfectly still, just outside the open doors as the monks meditated. It became a silent part of the monastery. The monks began to notice how still the cat sat, its back straight, its tail curled softly around its body, its eyes half closed, yet alert. Day after day, the cat would sit like this through the whole session, not moving, not sleeping, just being. One morning, a young monk named Nilo grew distracted by the cat. His thoughts wandered. Why does the cat sit so calmly? What does it know? Does it understand meditation better than I do? He tried harder to focus, but the harder he tried, the more restless he became. After the session, he approached the elder monk, Master Cain, and asked, "Why does that cat sit like that? It doesn't chant, it doesn't know the teachings, yet it sits so peacefully. I know the Dharma, and still I struggle." Master Cain looked at the cat, now licking its paw lazily in the sunlight. "Perhaps," he said gently, "it sits in peace because it has no reason not to." Nilo frowned. "But it doesn't try. It doesn't do anything." Cain smiled. "Exactly." That evening, Nilo sat again, this time not trying to reach stillness, but to notice it, like the cat did. He didn't chase thoughts away. He didn't fight to feel calm. He simply sat, with soft eyes and a soft breath. Outside, the cat watched, still, unbothered. And something in Nilo softened. He began to understand. The cat wasn't meditating. It was simply being fully present. No past, no future, no effort, just this moment. And maybe that, he realized, was the purest form of meditation. Lesson of the story: peace doesn't always come from effort. Sometimes it comes from letting go. Like the cat who watched meditation, stillness is found when we stop trying to become and instead allow ourselves to simply be. A pebble in the stream of time. In the foothills of a gentle mountain, where a narrow stream whispered through the rocks, there lay a single, smooth pebble beneath the water's surface. It had been there for many years, no longer sharp, no longer restless. The stream had passed over it in every season, in floods of spring, in the soft trickle of summer, in the frozen silence of winter. One day, a boy named Kavi wandered to the stream, his heart heavy with confusion. He had lost his way, not on a path, but inside himself. He felt rushed by time, pushed by the world, always being told to become something, to move faster, to do more. But inside, he felt like he was falling behind, even when he didn't know where he was going. He sat by the stream, tossing stones without thought. Some splashed loudly, some skipped and sank. But then he saw the pebble resting beneath the clear water, unmoving, quiet. Its surface was soft, its shape round, not like the other stones. Curious, Kavi reached in and held it in his hand. It was cool, smooth, and unexpectedly comforting. An old monk, who often walked the stream's edge, noticed the boy and sat beside him. Seeing the pebble in Kavi's hand, the monk smiled. "That stone was once jagged," he said gently. "Sharp edges, broken pieces. But the water has passed over it for years, never rushing, never forcing. And now it is smooth, not because it tried, but because it allowed time to shape it." Kavi looked down at the pebble again, this time with quiet eyes. He understood. The stream didn't fight to shape the stone. It simply flowed, gently, consistently, and in time. It changed everything. The monk stood and left, but Kavi stayed a little longer, letting the cool stream brush against his feet. He held the pebble like a secret, like a reminder that not everything needed to happen today. The sky above him stayed still, and the stream moved on, just as it always had. Lesson of the story. Growth doesn't happen all at once. Like a pebble in the stream of time, we are shaped slowly, gently, by the flow of life. We do not need to rush to become. We only need to stay open and allow time to do its quiet work. The bridge made of breath. In a valley nestled between two ancient mountains, there was a small village separated by a fast, wild river. The current was too strong to swim, and there was no bridge to cross, only jagged stones and the memory of one that once stood long ago. The villagers on each side rarely met. Over time, they grew distant. Stories became distorted, trust faded, and silence turned into quiet resentment. No one dared to try and cross. It was said that even the bravest fell into the river's roar, swallowed by its restless waters. One day, a wandering monk named Aaron arrived in the valley. He was old, with gentle eyes and a voice like flowing water. He listened to both sides of the village and noticed not anger, but sorrow, an aching to reconnect, covered by fear. He asked to be taken to the river. As he stood at its edge, the villagers followed, curious. But instead of laying stones or building ropes, Aaron sat down, closed his eyes, and began to breathe, slowly, deeply. The villagers watched, confused. Some whispered that he had gone mad, but Aaron continued, inhale, exhale, his presence as calm as the mountain around him. Minutes passed, then hours, and still he breathed, unmoved by the noise of the rushing water or the weight of expectation. A child stepped forward, drawn by something she didn't understand. She sat beside him and began to breathe too. Then an elder from the other side came, stepping onto a stone in the river, and sat. One by one, people came, not to speak, not to fix, but to breathe. In that space between breaths, the river began to sound different, less like a barrier, more like a song. People didn't notice the moment the bridge was built, because it wasn't made of wood or stone. It was made of presence, made of patience, made of quiet hearts willing to sit with discomfort and listen, not just to each other, but to themselves. By the next morning, The two villages sat together by the riverbank, watching the sun rise in shared silence. Lesson of the story: some divides cannot be crossed with words alone, but with breath, soft, steady, and true, we can build bridges that reconnect what fear once separated. Peace begins in stillness, and stillness begins with a single breath. The echo of stillness. In the quiet valleys near Jetavana, where the trees grew thick and the air was soft with silence, there stood a cave that no one visited. It was hidden by vines, its entrance low and narrow. Most passed by without noticing it, but those who did said something strange about it. When you sat inside, you could hear something, even when there was no sound. One day, a young monk named Sela, troubled by the noise in his mind, came to the forest to find peace. He had tried many meditations, many mantras, but his thoughts always came rushing in, louder, faster, demanding his attention. He longed for quiet, not just around him, but inside him. As he walked beneath the canopy, he felt pulled toward a part of the forest he hadn't explored. There, half covered in moss, he found the cave. He stepped inside. It was small and dark. No light reached its walls. The air was still, untouched by even a breeze. He sat, unsure why he had come, but something told him to stay. At first, his mind filled with noise, regrets, questions, memories. They clattered in the silence, growing louder with each breath. But he didn't leave. He stayed still. And slowly, something changed. The noise didn't disappear, but he noticed there was space between it. A pause, a quiet hum beneath the thoughts. Not silence exactly, but something deeper, something softer. It didn't speak, but it echoed through him, a rhythm, a peace. The stillness of the cave wasn't empty, it was alive. He sat for hours, perhaps longer. He began to hear his own breath, his heartbeat, the softest sound of air moving through his nose. And beneath all of it, something he hadn't heard in a long time, himself. Not the voice of his mind, but the presence beneath it. When he emerged, the forest looked the same, but something in him had shifted. The silence followed him, like a friend walking beside him, even among the noise of the world. Lesson of the story: true stillness is not the absence of sound, but the presence of deep listening. When we sit with silence long enough, it begins to speak, and what we hear is the echo of our own soul returning home. The old monk's gentle snore. At the edge of a forest temple, surrounded by quiet hills and swaying trees, there lived an elderly monk named Bhanu. He was the oldest in the monastery. His robes faded with time, his movements slow, his smile soft and knowing. He no longer gave long teachings or led rituals. He simply was. And yet, his presence was enough to calm even the most restless minds. Every afternoon, after the midday meal and chores were done, Bhanu would sit under the Bodhi tree, rest his back against the trunk, and drift into sleep. And like clockwork, moments later, a gentle snore would rise from his chest, light and steady, like a soft drumbeat wrapped in breath. At first, the younger monks found it funny. They whispered and smiled among themselves, calling it the sacred snore. But soon, they began to notice something strange. When Bhanu slept, the air around him seemed to change. Birds came closer, the wind slowed, and even their own thoughts, usually spinning and loud, began to quiet down when they sat near him. One day, a young monk named Ketu asked the abbot, "Why is it that when Bhanu snores, I feel more peaceful than when I try to meditate in silence?" The abbot laughed kindly. "Because Bhanu is not just sleeping, he is resting in trust." Ketu frowned. "Trust?" "Yes," the abbot replied. "He trusts the moment. He trusts the Dharma. He trusts that nothing more needs to be done. No chasing, no fixing, no becoming. Only being. Even in sleep, that peace radiates. It's not the snore that calms you, Ketu. It's the surrender beneath it." That evening, Ketu sat near Bhanu under the Bodhi tree. The snore came, soft as always. But this time, Ketu didn't smile. He listened, and in the rhythm of that breath, he felt a deep truth. Peace isn't always found in effort. Sometimes it is found in complete ease, in letting go, in trusting life to carry us, even as we rest. Lesson of the story. True peace doesn't shout. It hums gently in surrender. Like the old monk's snore beneath the Bodhi tree, calm is born not from control, but from trust in the present moment. Lanterns across the lake. There was a lake so calm it looked like glass, nestled between two hills in the outskirts of Magadha. Its surface reflected everything: the sky, the stars, and the people who came to its edge at nightfall. Every year during the full moon of the harvest, the villagers would gather in silence, each carrying a single paper lantern lit with a small flame. They came not to celebrate, but to remember, to release. Among them was a woman named Jaya. She had come every year for 5 years, each time with a different wish, a different sorrow, a different name written inside her lantern. Her husband, her mother, her child, all gone one by one, like the light from a candle after a breath. This year, she hesitated at the shore. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her lantern on the water. She had nothing left to write. Her grief had gone beyond words. The lantern floated slowly, its glow soft against the night. Around her, hundreds of lanterns began to dot the lake, drifting gently across the water like stars searching for a place to rest. But Jaya didn't feel peace. Not yet. An old monk approached quietly and sat beside her. He didn't speak, just watched the lake, the way the lanterns moved with the rhythm of the wind. After some time, he finally said, "These lights are not sent to carry away pain. They're sent to remind us the pain can be held with gentleness." Jaya looked at her lantern again. It was floating further now, joining the others, no longer alone. The monk continued, "Grief is not something to push away. It's a lantern, too. You place it on the water and let it drift, not to forget, but to release the weight of holding it so tightly." A breeze passed through, cool and clean. For the first time in many years, Jaya didn't try to stop her tears. She didn't try to be strong. She just watched her light disappear into the darkness, feeling the stillness inside her rise and soften. Lesson of the story. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. Like lanterns drifting across the lake, we release our sorrows not to lose them, but to honor them, gently, quietly, and with love. The Sleeping Forest Monastery. Deep within an ancient forest, where light filtered through leaves like golden dust, there stood a monastery so hidden and quiet that travelers often walked past without noticing it. The villagers called it the Sleeping Monastery, not because no one lived there, but because it always seemed to be dreaming. Smoke rose slowly from its chimneys. Bells chimed only when the wind moved them, and the monks who lived there spoke little, moved softly, and carried with them a silence so deep it felt like the forest itself was breathing. One day, a young wanderer named Mira arrived at its gate. She had walked for weeks, searching for a place to rest. Not just her body, but her spirit. Her heart carried too many burdens, regrets from the past, fears about the future, thoughts that clung like vines and never let her mind be still. She knocked gently. No one answered. But the gate creaked open on its own. Inside, she found monks tending to the garden, sweeping stone paths, feeding birds with open palms. No one rushed, no one spoke unless needed. And when they did, their words were few and kind, like petals falling into water. She was given a room, simple and clean, with a mat, a blanket, and a window that looked out into trees. There was no schedule, no long list of rules. Only the rhythm of the day, led by the sun and shaped by silence. At first, Mira felt restless. She wanted guidance, answers, a path. But the monks only smiled and pointed gently to the garden, to the forest, to the seat beneath the old fig tree where many before her had simply sat. So she sat. Day after day, she watched. She listened. The rustle of leaves, the sound of water dripping from moss, the gentle breath of the forest at dawn. And slowly, something inside her began to shift. The thoughts didn't disappear, but they no longer felt heavy. Her body softened, her heart grew quiet. And for the first time in years, she felt what she hadn't even known she was looking for. Rest. Not sleep, not escape, but rest. As if the whole monastery, like the forest around it, was gently holding her in a dream she didn't need to wake from. Lesson of the story. Sometimes healing doesn't come through doing, but through being. Like the sleeping forest monastery, peace lives in stillness, waiting for us to stop searching long enough to receive it. The fish who meditated. In the deep, still waters of a quiet pond far from any village, there lived a small silverfish named Namo. Unlike the others, Namo didn't swim fast or chase the sparkle of insects across the surface. He spent most of his days beneath a large lily pad, floating in place, his fins barely moving. The other fish often teased him. "Why don't you swim like the rest of us?" They laughed. "There's nothing to find just sitting there." But Namo didn't mind. He wasn't looking for anything outside. He was listening to the silence that lived beneath the ripples, beneath the noise, beneath even his own thoughts. Namo had not always been this way. He once darted through the pond like the others, chasing everything that shimmered. But one day, while hiding from a heron's shadow, he had taken shelter deep below the surface, where the water was dark, cool, and still. There, far from fear and rush, he had felt something he couldn't name. A softness, a space that needed nothing. Since that day, he returned often to that still place, not because he was afraid, but because he had discovered a kind of peace he couldn't find by moving. One morning, the pond was disturbed. A loud splash followed by swirling currents. An otter had entered the water, and panic spread quickly. Fish darted in all directions, stirring up mud and fear. But Namo stayed beneath his lily pad, unmoving. He closed his eyes. He felt the rush pass through the water, around him, but not into him. He breathed, slowly, deeply, gently. When the pond calmed, the others returned, wide-eyed and exhausted. They stared at Namo, surprised to see him so calm. "Weren't you afraid?" one asked. "I felt the fear," Namo replied, "but I didn't swim with it." From that day on, a few of the younger fish began to sit with Namo beneath the lily pad, not to escape, not to copy, but to feel what it was like to be still. Lesson of the story. Peace isn't the absence of chaos, but the space within it. Like the fish who meditated, we can learn to be still beneath the surface, where even in trouble, the heart can remain calm and free. A cup of peaceful water. In a small village, surrounded by green hills and quiet rice fields, there was a humble tea master named Riku. He wasn't a monk nor a scholar, but people often said that just sitting with him felt like meditation. He served tea from sunrise to dusk in a tiny wooden room where the floor creaked and the wind sang through bamboo walls. There was no sign outside, no prices, just a simple message written in faded ink. Come in with your mind full. Leave with your cup empty. One morning, a traveler named Soma arrived. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes tired. She had wandered for years, collecting teachings, chasing peace like a shadow that always slipped from her fingers. She had been told this old man made tea that stilled even the noisiest heart. She entered quietly. Riku bowed, said nothing, and motioned for her to sit. He placed a plain ceramic cup in front of her, then turned to prepare the tea, slowly, carefully, with hands that moved like falling leaves. The room smelled of steam and earth. There were no chants, no lectures, only the sound of pouring water. When he returned, he filled her cup, but just halfway. Soma looked at it, puzzled. "Is that all?" she asked. Riku smiled gently. "Enough to drink, not enough to drown." She paused, unsure how to respond. He sat across from her, sipping his own tea in silence. After a while, he spoke, quietly, as if not to disturb the steam. "You carry many thoughts," he said, "and each one is like a drop of ink in clear water. The more you pour in, the darker it becomes." Soma stared into her cup. The water was clear, still. She could see her reflection in it. "How do I clear the mind?" she asked softly. "You don't," he replied. "You stop pouring." She held the cup, warm between her palms. She didn't drink right away. She just breathed. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to solve anything, only to sit and to stop pouring. Lesson of the story. Clarity doesn't come from more effort. It comes from less. Like a cup of peaceful water, the mind becomes still, not when we fill it, but when we allow it to rest. The wind that bowed. In the dry season, the plains outside the city of Vesali stretched wide and golden under the sun. The grass stood tall, brittle and proud, refusing to bend even as the days grew hotter. Farmers walked carefully through the fields, knowing that one strong wind could tear the stalks apart. High above, the wind watched. It had wandered for centuries, over mountains, oceans, forests, rushing, dancing, roaring. But the wind was not cruel. It simply moved. It had never learned how to be still, It had never known how to touch the world gently. One afternoon, the wind rushed across the plains, as it always did. The tall grass tried to resist, standing stiff and unyielding. The force snapped many of them at their roots, and dust filled the air. From the distance, a child named Luma watched the fields break. She turned to the old monk beside her and asked, "Why does the wind always bring damage?" The monk smiled and pointed toward a smaller patch near the river, where a few bamboo shoots swayed calmly in the breeze. "Look there," he said. "Not everything fights the wind." The wind, hearing this, paused. It drifted low to the bamboo and noticed how they moved, not against it, but with it. They bowed as it passed, not in fear, but in grace. And when the wind grew quiet, the bamboo stood tall again, unharmed. For the first time, the wind slowed down. It softened. It began to wonder what it might feel like to move without breaking, to pass through without taking, to bow too. So the wind learned to whisper instead of roar. It curved through the trees. It brushed against faces like a breath. And as it passed over the plains again, it bowed, not in weakness, but in care. The tall grasses, learning from the bamboo, began to bend just slightly, and the field, once broken by force, now danced with the wind in quiet rhythm. Lesson of the story: true strength is not in how hard we push, but in how gently we can move. Like the wind that bowed, we learn that real power lies in humility, in the choice to soften, to listen, and to pass through the world with kindness. The empty chair in the garden. In the back corner of a quiet monastery, hidden beneath flowering vines and shaded by tall trees, sat an old wooden chair. It was simple, weathered by sun and rain, its arms smooth from years of use. No one knew exactly who had placed it there or when. It had simply always been a part of the garden, like the stones, the wind chimes, and the drifting scent of jasmine. The monks never sat in it. They said it was a seat of presence, a place where people came not to speak, but to feel. Visitors would wander the grounds, then stop when they reached the chair. Something about it invited them to pause, to breathe, to just be. One such visitor was a man named Haru, a merchant who had lost nearly everything. His business had collapsed, his home was gone, and the people he once trusted had drifted away like leaves on wind. Carrying only what fit in a bag, he came to the monastery not for answers, but because he had nowhere else left to go. A monk welcomed him kindly and led him through the garden. When they reached the chair, the monk simply nodded toward it and said, "Sit here a while. No need to talk." Haru sat. At first, all he felt was the ache in his chest, the heaviness of failure, the anger, the fear. He wanted to cry or scream or leave, but something in the stillness around the chair, something about how it stood alone yet peaceful, kept him there. Birds chirped above, leaves rustled softly in the breeze. A butterfly landed on the armrest and then fluttered away. Haru began to notice his breath, shallow at first, then deeper, slower. The chair didn't judge him. It didn't ask him to be strong. It only held space. And in that space, Haru felt something return. Not his old life, not the things he had lost, but something quieter. A small, steady light. The beginning of peace. He sat until the sun began to fall behind the trees. Then he stood, bowed to the chair, and walked away, not fixed, but no longer broken. Lesson of the story. Some healing doesn't come through words or action, but through space. Like the empty chair in the garden, stillness can hold what we cannot, gently reminding us that peace begins when we allow ourselves to simply sit with what is. The sand mandala that dissolved. In a monastery high in the mountains, where the air was thin and the sky seemed close enough to touch, a group of monks spent weeks creating a mandala, a sacred design made of colored sand. Each grain was placed with care, with breath, with intention. The design grew day by day, blooming with symbols of compassion, wisdom, and the universe itself. Visitors came in silence, watching as the delicate pattern took shape. They whispered in awe, afraid to breathe too hard, worried the design might vanish too soon. Among the monks was a young novice named Temo. It was his first mandala. He had never known patience like this before. His fingers cramped, his back ached, but his heart was full. With every swirl, every petal, every line, he poured his hopes into the sand. He imagined how beautiful it would look when finished, how proud he would feel standing beside it. Finally, on the 21st day, the last grain was placed. The mandala shimmered in the afternoon light, perfect and alive. But as the bell rang at sunset, the senior monk stood before it and gently picked up a wooden brush. Temo's eyes widened. "Wait!" he whispered, panic rising in his chest. "We just finished!" The elder looked at him with kindness and said nothing. He slowly dragged the brush through the center of the mandala, breaking the pattern, scattering the colors. One stroke, then another, then another. Temo's hands trembled. He wanted to shout, to cry, to stop it, but he didn't. He just watched. When the last swirl of sand had been brushed into a pile, the monks gathered it carefully and poured it into a jar. They carried it to the river, where it was offered to the water, returned to the earth. Temo followed, silent. As the last bits of color disappeared into the current, something inside him dissolved too. Not the beauty, not the joy, but the grasping, the need to hold, to keep, to freeze a moment forever. He felt strangely light. Lesson of the story. Everything beautiful is also temporary. Like the sand mandala that dissolved, we are reminded that letting go is not the end of beauty. It is its final blessing. In impermanence, we find freedom. In release, we find peace. The thought that flew away. In a quiet valley where the sky stretched wide and the winds moved gently through fields of tall grass, there lived a young monk named Arun. Though devoted and sincere, Arun struggled with his thoughts. Every time he sat to meditate, a storm would rise inside him. Regrets from the past, fears about the future, worries about being good enough. No matter how still he sat, his mind spun faster. He often spoke to the elder monk, Master Sela, about this frustration. One afternoon, after yet another restless session in the meditation hall, Arun approached him again. "My mind is like a cage of restless birds," Arun said. "I try to calm them, but they keep flapping, screaming, flying in circles." Master Sela smiled, his eyes soft beneath thick grey brows. "Good," he said. "That means you are beginning to see them." Then, without another word, he handed Arun a single sheet of thin paper and a small brush. "Write one of your loudest thoughts, he said. The one that visits you again and again. Arun hesitated, then slowly wrote, "What if I'm not enough?" Sela nodded and folded the paper into a delicate shape, a simple paper bird. He walked with Arun up the hill where the wind always blew strongest. The grass bent gently, the trees whispered, the sky was wide and waiting. "Let it go," Sela said. Arun opened his hand. The paper bird lifted, caught the wind, and soared upward, light, weightless, free. They watched it rise until it disappeared. Sela turned to him. "That was just one thought. You gave it a form. You saw it. You honored it. And then you let it fly." Arun said nothing. His chest felt strange, not empty, but light. Something had loosened. That night, during meditation, the thoughts came again. But this time, Arun imagined each one as a bird, not to trap, not to fight, just to see. And with each breath, he gently opened his hand and let them go. One by one, the sky grew wider. Lesson of the story. Not every thought needs to be held. Some are meant to be seen, felt, and released. Like a bird on the wind, peace begins when we stop clinging and let the thought fly away. The walking stick of kindness. In a dusty village nestled along the trade roads of ancient India, there lived an old man named Devaka. His back was bent with age, his steps slow, and he leaned gently on a carved wooden walking stick passed down to him by his teacher, who had once been a student of the Buddha himself. The stick was nothing grand, simple teak, worn smooth by years of hands and time, but it was known in the village as the walking stick of kindness. Devaka was not a wealthy man, nor a powerful one, but he was known by all, not because of stories he told, but because of the way he moved through the world. With every step he took, he looked people in the eye. He stopped for strangers. He listened more than he spoke. When someone stumbled, he was the first to offer his hand, and if they couldn't walk, he offered his stick, even if it meant leaning on pain himself. One evening, a young traveler came to the village, bitter from betrayal and heavy with anger. He mocked the people's simplicity, scowled at their smiles, and refused every gesture of warmth. "The world is cruel," he said. "Kindness is weakness." Devaka didn't argue. He simply handed the traveler his walking stick and said, "Take it. You'll need it tomorrow." Confused, the young man shrugged and accepted, thinking it meant nothing. The next day, while hiking a nearby trail, the traveler slipped on loose stones and twisted his ankle badly. Alone and unable to walk, he leaned heavily on the old man's stick, hobbling back to the village with each painful step. At sunset, he returned the stick, humbled. Devaka only smiled and said, "Even kindness given to disbelief returns with understanding." The traveler sat beside him quietly, the anger inside him quieter now. He stayed for 3 more days, just watching. How Devaka treated the stubborn, the rude, the lost, with the same gentleness he gave to children and friends. The traveler asked no more questions. He left one morning before sunrise, but carved his own walking stick before he did. Lesson of the story. Kindness is not weakness. It is strength that asks for nothing in return. Like a walking stick, it may seem small, but it helps carry the weight of others when they cannot walk alone. The smile that melted anger. In a bustling town nestled between mountains and rice fields, there was a small temple known not for its size or riches, but for a single monk who never seemed to grow angry. His name was Bhante Rami, and his smile was quiet, warm, and constant, like sunlight slipping through clouds. People often visited just to see it, hoping it might soften something inside them too. But not everyone admired him. In the same town lived a man named Joru. He was known for his sharp words and quick temper. Life had not been kind to him. Betrayals, losses, disappointment. Over time, his heart had hardened and his tongue had grown sharp. He believed kindness was weakness and peace was for those who had never struggled. One day, Joru walked past the temple and saw Bhante Rami sweeping leaves from the steps, still smiling. That smile stirred something uncomfortable. "What are you smiling about, monk?" Joru snapped. "You think the world is so easy? You've never lived a real life. You just hide here behind your robes." Rami looked up, meeting his eyes with no defense, no resistance. He bowed gently. "You must be carrying something very heavy." Joru's face burned. "Don't speak like you know me." "I don't," Rami said, "but I can feel the weight." And then he smiled again, not in pity, not in pride, just a simple, quiet smile, one that didn't try to fix, one that didn't try to win, one that said, "I see your pain, and I do not fear it." Joru stood frozen. No one had ever met his anger with such softness. No one had ever allowed him to be seen without flinching. Something inside him cracked. Not all the way, not loudly, but just enough. He didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, slower than before. That night, he returned, not to argue, but to sit on the temple steps. Rami brought him tea. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Sometimes the deepest healing begins not with words, but with a presence that holds no judgment. Lesson of the story. Anger cannot survive where it is seen with compassion. Like ice beneath a steady sun, it softens when met with warmth. A true smile doesn't overpower. It melts. The dream of the enlightened elephant. Long ago, in the forests near the Himalayan foothills, there lived a great elephant named Nalaka. He was larger than the others, with ivory tusks and skin marked by age and experience. But what set Nalaka apart was not his size, it was his silence. While other elephants bellowed and stamped, Nalaka moved with a calm that made even the birds pause as he passed. The forest animals often came to him for help, not because he solved their problems, but because when he listened, it felt like he truly heard them, even the things they didn't say. He would stand still, his deep eyes watching, his breath slow and steady. In his presence, fear softened. Anger melted. Many believed he had seen something others had not. And that was true. Years before, Nalaka had a dream. In the dream, he stood on the banks of a vast river. The sky was both night and day, the moon and sun shining together. In the water, he saw his reflection, not as a beast, but as light, gentle, glowing light. Around him, all things breathed in rhythm, the trees, the sky, the wind, even time itself. In the dream, a voice rose, not loud, but clear. You are not apart from this world. You are part of its breath. When Nalaka awoke, nothing looked different, but he was different. He stopped chasing things, stopped fighting what was. He no longer competed for food or status. Instead, he walked slowly, ate mindfully, and offered space for others to simply be. And without ever saying a word, he became a teacher, not of rules, but of presence. One day, a young and restless cub asked him, "What did you do to become wise?" Nalaka looked at the cub for a long time, then pointed to the stream. The cub watched the water. "But it's just flowing." Nalaka blinked slowly. "Exactly." Lesson of the story. Wisdom is not about knowing more, it's about being more present. Like the enlightened elephant, we awaken not by rising above the world, but by realizing we are already part of its quiet beauty. Stillness is not emptiness. It is where truth gently breathes. The frog on the Zafu. At a peaceful monastery near the edge of a lotus pond, the monks would gather each morning in the meditation hall. They sat quietly on their round cushions, zafus, with straight backs, still hands, and calm breath. The hall opened onto the garden, and the scent of damp earth often drifted in with the morning air. One summer day just before dawn, the youngest monk, Tilo, entered the hall and paused. Something was different. On his cushion, right in the center, sat a small green frog. Its legs were tucked beneath it, its eyes half closed, completely still. Tilo hesitated. He was taught not to disturb life. So, unsure what to do, he quietly sat on the mat beside his cushion, glancing at the frog between breaths. The others filed in, noticing the odd guest, but saying nothing. The head monk, Master Ananda, gave a small nod and began the session. As the minutes passed, Tilo's thoughts wandered. Why is the frog there? Is it mocking us? Does it even understand what meditation is? His mind was restless. The frog, meanwhile, didn't move. It simply sat. The sun rose, casting soft gold across the floor. The frog remained, still and calm, breathing with the same rhythm as the monks. When the session ended, Master Ananda stood and smiled. "Did anyone notice our visiting teacher this morning?" The monks chuckled quietly. Tilo looked down, slightly embarrassed. "He did not chant," the master said. "He brought no scriptures. Yet he reminded us of something very simple." Everyone waited. He sat with no need to improve, no need to achieve. He did not think, "Am I doing this right? Am I worthy of peace?" He simply sat, present, alive. Tilo looked again at the frog. It blinked once, then with a soft hop, left the cushion and disappeared into the garden. That morning, Tilo's heart grew quieter, not because he learned something new, but because he was reminded. Even the simplest presence, when fully here, becomes sacred. Lesson of the story. Peace doesn't require perfection. Like the frog on the Zafu, true stillness comes when we stop trying to be better and start allowing ourselves to simply be. A thread of compassion. In a small village where the houses were built of clay and the doors always stood open, there lived an old woman named Amma. She wasn't known for wealth or learning, but for something much simpler. She wove thread. Every day, she sat outside her home on a worn mat, her fingers moving gently through strands of cotton dyed with soft, natural colors. She spun them into thread and offered them freely to those who asked, tailors, weavers, even children playing pretend. People asked her often why she gave so much without asking anything back. She would only smile and say, "Every thread I give carries a little prayer." One day, a young man named Pavan arrived in the village. He was quiet and distant, wearing a heavy cloak and a heavier heart. He had wandered far from his home, having lost his family in a fire, and carried deep grief that made him feel like a stranger in every place he went. He sat across from Amma, not to speak, but simply to rest. She said nothing at first. Then, slowly, she handed him a single piece of thread, red, soft, warm in the hand. "This one is for mending," she said. "Not cloth, but hearts." Pavan didn't respond, but he didn't let go of the thread either. The next day, he returned. Amma handed him blue thread. "For listening," she said, "even to your own silence." Then green, for growing again. Then gold, for forgiving yourself. Each day he came, and each day she offered one small thread, never asking what he had done or where he had come from, just placing thread into his hand, as if saying, "You still belong, you are still part of this world." Weeks passed. One morning, Amma awoke to find a small woven cloth left at her doorstep. Not perfect, not finished, but held together by many colors. Held together by someone learning to mend. She smiled, touched it gently, and began spinning again. Lesson of the story. Compassion doesn't always arrive as a grand gesture. Sometimes it comes as a thread, small, soft, and steady, offered quietly again and again, until what was torn begins to heal. The bamboo wind chime. In a quiet temple by the sea, there hung a bamboo wind chime above the entrance to the meditation hall. It was simple, 6 hollow tubes gently tied with string, swaying from a wooden frame. It didn't sing often, only when the wind moved just right. But when it did, its song was soft and hollow, like the sound of distant laughter or an old memory returning home. The monks never spoke of it. They passed beneath it each day without a glance, yet everyone felt its presence. One evening, a young monk named Ryan, troubled by thoughts he couldn't name, sat beneath the chime alone. His heart was heavy, though nothing was exactly wrong. He had followed every teaching, kept every discipline, yet peace still felt like something just out of reach, like a dream you almost remember when you wake. As the sun began to fall, the wind stirred gently through the temple walls. The bamboo chime came to life, not loudly, just a few soft, hollow tones, the kind of sound you don't hear with your ears alone, but with your chest, your breath, your memory. Ryan looked up. He had passed under it 100 times, but now, in this moment of stillness, he heard it differently. Each note was light, empty, and yet not meaningless. The music came not from the bamboo itself, but from the space inside it. It sang not because it was full, but because it was hollow. He remembered what his teacher had once said during a morning walk. "A chime cannot sing if it's too full, just like the mind." Ryan closed his eyes and breathed. He realized he had been trying to fill himself with answers, goals, ideals of who he should become. But peace, like the sound of the chime, came only when he allowed space inside himself. Space for stillness, space for breath, space for not knowing. The wind blew once more, and the bamboo sang again, empty and completely whole. Lesson of the story. True peace comes not from what we hold, but from what we make room for. Like the bamboo wind chime, we find our calm not by being full, but by allowing ourselves to be open and let the wind move through us. The day the mountains breathed. In the northern ranges, where snow kissed the peaks year-round and clouds clung to stone like silk, there stood a village built between two sleeping giants, mountains so old the villagers believed they had once been alive. The elders told stories of a time when the mountains could breathe, when the earth rose and fell with each quiet exhale, and the world moved in time with their stillness. Most thought these tales were just stories, but not Arun. Arun was a quiet boy, often found alone on the ledge above the village, staring out at the endless sky. He had questions no one could answer, about life, loss, the aching inside that sometimes woke him before dawn. His father had died when he was small, and though many tried to comfort him, nothing eased the emptiness. It wasn't sadness alone, it was the silence that followed it, the strange echo that never left. One morning, Arun climbed higher than he ever had before, past the tree line, past the snow fox trails, until he stood where the air was thin and everything was quiet. He sat, cross-legged, closed his eyes, and listened. Not for sound, but for stillness. Hours passed. Then something shifted. He felt it, not in his ears, but in his chest. A deep, slow rhythm, a rise, a fall. Not from him, not from the wind. It came from the mountains themselves. He opened his eyes. Nothing had changed. The rocks were still, the peaks untouched. And yet he felt the earth breathe beneath him, not as a roar, not as an earthquake, but as the soft inhale of something ancient, alive, at peace. Tears filled his eyes, not from fear, but from awe. The silence that haunted him now held him like a lullaby. The emptiness wasn't empty at all. It was full of presence, like the space between heartbeats. He sat until the stars began to show. Then, slowly, he made his way down, his steps light, his body warm despite the cold. When he returned, he didn't speak of what he felt. He didn't need to. He just smiled more, listened more, and when others grieved, he sat beside them, not with answers, but with presence. Lesson of the story: some truths cannot be spoken. Like the day the mountains breathed, there are moments when stillness itself holds the wisdom we seek, reminding us that silence is not absence, but the most sacred form of connection. The saffron cloak in the rain. The rainy season had arrived early in the mountain village. For days the skies wept without pause, and the earth softened beneath the feet of those who walked it. The rivers swelled, the air thickened with the smell of wet soil and falling leaves, and even the temple grounds grew quiet under the weight of the endless downpour. One morning, a young monk named Dev returned to the temple soaked through, his shoulders tense and eyes clouded. He had been helping villagers prepare for the floods, carrying sandbags, lifting wood, moving from house to house with little rest. Though his work was noble, his heart felt heavy. Why do we suffer so much? He thought. Why does kindness not stop the rain? He entered the temple's meditation hall, dripping water onto the floor. Sitting at the front, unmoving, was the head monk, Venerable Ayu. His saffron cloak was darkened by rain, clinging to his shoulders, soaked just like Dev's. "You walked in the rain too?" Dev asked, surprised. Ayu opened his eyes and nodded, his voice calm. "Yes. I visited a widow at the edge of the village. She lost her home last night." "But your robe, it's ruined," Dev said. Ayu looked down, then back at Dev. "Is it ruined, or is it wet?" Dev fell silent. Ayu continued, "Rain falls, not to hurt us, not to test us. It simply falls. My robe is soaked because I walked through the storm, but my mind, Dev, is dry, still." Dev sat beside him, his own robe clinging to his skin. The sound of rain echoed through the hall like a gentle drum. Ayu didn't rush to dry himself, didn't resist the wetness or complain of discomfort. And Dev understood. Suffering grows not always from what touches us, but from how tightly we cling to how things should be. The rain cannot be stopped, but peace is not about staying dry. It's about staying present, even when soaked. They sat together in silence, two saffron cloaks heavy with rain, and hearts beginning to feel light again. Lesson of the story. Life brings rain, not as punishment, but as part of the path. Like the saffron cloak in the storm, peace is not about avoiding discomfort, but walking through it with a still mind and an open heart. The baby who laughed at Samsara. In a quiet village near Kapilavastu, where the river curved like a question mark around the fields, a child was born under a sky filled with stars. The midwives said the air felt different that night, lighter, as if even the wind paused to listen. The baby didn't cry when he entered the world. He laughed. It wasn't loud or wild, just a soft, sparkling sound that made the oil lamps flicker and the crickets fall silent for a moment. His mother, Lila, held him close, her eyes wide with wonder. "He's not afraid," she whispered, "not even of being born." As the days passed, the baby, named Sanu, grew like any other child. But something about him was different. He laughed often, even in his sleep. He laughed when he fell. He laughed when the milk spilled, and not with mischief, but with delight, as if he saw something others couldn't. The villagers found it strange. "Doesn't he understand pain yet?" they asked. "Why does he laugh at everything?" One evening, Lila brought him to the old monk who lived at the edge of the forest. She placed the child in his lap, and for a while the monk simply watched him. Sanu looked into the monk's eyes and began to giggle. The monk smiled, deeply moved. "He knows," he said quietly. "He remembers." "Remembers what?" Lila asked, confused. "Samsara," the monk said, "the turning wheel. Birth and death, gain and loss, joy and sorrow. He's not untouched by it. He's just not trapped in it. He sees it for what it is, a dance, not a prison." The monk explained that before the veil of forgetfulness settles, some souls come into this world still carrying the spark of awareness, like stars that remember their light even before dawn. Sanu grew, and the world did reach him. He cried sometimes, he stumbled, he felt hunger and loneliness. But even as he learned the ways of the world, he never stopped laughing, not in denial, but in deep understanding. His laughter wasn't escape. It was compassion, it was knowing, and when others were hurting, he would sit beside them and, if they were ready, share that same laugh. Not to mock pain, but to soften it, to remind them that even sorrow, too, is part of the dance. Lesson of the story. Awakening doesn't mean escaping the world. It means seeing it clearly and meeting it with joy. Like the baby who laughed at Samsara, we can learn to smile, not because life is always easy, but because we understand that nothing, not even suffering, is forever. The monastery with no walls, high in the hills where mist lingered like breath and the wind carried the scent of pine and ash, there was once a monastery that had no walls. No gates, no roof, no bell tower, just flat stones arranged in a circle and a small wooden altar where incense burned slowly, even in the wind. Travelers often walked past it, mistaking it for ruins, but to those who knew, it was a sacred place, alive with silence, rich with meaning. They called it the monastery with no walls. It was said that long ago, an old monk named Tenzu had lived there. He had been offered a great temple with golden statues and hundreds of followers, but he quietly declined. Instead, he gathered a few disciples and chose this open space on the hilltop. They built nothing. They planted no boundary. They only practiced, under the sky, among the trees, with no shelter from sun or storm. One day, a young monk named Nima, tired and curious, made the long walk up the hill to see the monastery. When he arrived, he stopped in confusion. "There is nothing here," he said aloud. Tenzu, now very old, was sitting on a stone nearby, sipping tea. He looked up with a warm smile. "There is everything here," he replied, "but there are no walls, no structure. How can this be a monastery?" Tenzu gestured to the open air around them. Walls keep things in and out, but the Dharma has no walls. It moves with the wind. It lives in each step, each breath. Why should truth need a ceiling? Nima sat beside him, unsure at first. The ground was uneven. There was no bell to start meditation, no door to close the world away, just wind, trees, the wide sky above them. And in that openness, something began to settle. There was no outside and inside, no separation between the world and the practice, just this moment and this breath. Years later, Nima would return often, not to find anything, but to remember that the monastery was not a building, it was a way of being. Lesson of the story: peace does not live behind walls. Like the monastery without borders, true presence needs no shelter. It blooms in openness, in simplicity, in the space where nothing is held and everything belongs. The whispering incense. In a hilltop monastery shaded by ancient fig trees, a single stick of incense was lit each morning before dawn. The monks believed its rising smoke carried not just scent, but prayers, gentle offerings that rose to the heavens like breath released in trust. The scent was soft, sandalwood and rose, with a warmth that seemed to wrap around the soul. One morning, a young monk named Kiran was asked to light the incense for the first time. He was nervous. He had only recently joined the monastery, and though his hands had learned the rituals, his heart still felt restless. He knelt before the altar, struck the match, and watched the incense catch fire before the flames softened into smoke. He bowed. He waited. But something inside him still felt empty. The others said that incense could teach you peace if you listened closely. But Kiran heard nothing, just the crackle of the wick, the silence of the hall, the steady beating of his heart. Still, he sat, unwilling to give up. Minutes passed, then more. The smoke curled and drifted upward, tracing invisible patterns in the air. As Kiran followed its movement with his eyes, something changed. He began to notice how gently it moved, not rushing, not reaching, just rising, dancing, dissolving. He leaned closer. The scent was quiet but deep. He breathed it in and felt the space around him soften. He breathed out, and with it, let go of one tight thought, then another. The smoke whispered nothing out loud, but something within it spoke. You don't have to try so hard. You don't have to be perfect to be at peace. You are already enough, just as you are. The whispers didn't come from outside. They rose from the silence the incense created in his mind, in his chest, in the space where longing once lived. And in that stillness, Kiran began to understand. The incense was not praying for him. It was teaching him how to pray, not with words, but with presence, with breath, with surrender. The stick burned slowly, fading to ash, its final trail of smoke rising like a soft goodbye. Lesson of the story. True peace doesn't shout, it whispers. Like incense, it rises from stillness, teaches through softness, and leaves behind not emptiness, but quiet presence. All we need to do is breathe and listen. The cup that emptied itself. In a small town nestled beside the river's bend, there lived a famous scholar named Aryan. He was known across the land for his knowledge of scriptures, his quick mind, and his endless curiosity. His home was filled with scrolls, ink-stained notes, and shelves that reached the ceiling. Yet, despite all his learning, Aryan could not find peace. His heart remained restless, his mind always searching for more. One day, he heard of an old monk named Darjun, who lived quietly in the hills beyond the city. People said the monk had no possessions, no reputation, and offered no formal teachings. Yet many who visited him returned changed. Driven by his hunger for answers, Aryan traveled up the winding path and found the monk sitting beside a stone table, sipping tea under a flowering tree. "I've come to learn," Aryan said. "I've read the sutras, studied every school, but I still feel incomplete." Darjun smiled and nodded. "Please, sit." He took out 2 cups and began to pour tea into Aryan's. He poured slowly, and soon the cup was full, but he didn't stop. Tea spilled over the rim, down the sides, onto the table. "Wait!" Aryan cried. "The cup is already full." Darjun looked up gently. "Exactly." Aryan blinked. "What do you mean?" "You have come with a full cup," Darjun said softly, "full of ideas, knowledge, expectations. But peace cannot be poured into a cup that's already full." He then picked up Aryan's cup and tilted it gently. The tea flowed out and onto the earth. "Sometimes," he continued, "we don't need to fill the mind. We need to empty it. Only then can something new enter. Only then can silence speak." Aryan stared at the cup, quiet now. He realized he had come expecting to add more to himself. But what he needed was less noise, less pride, less need to understand everything. That evening, he sat in stillness with Darjun. No more questions, no more needing to prove, just space, within and around. Lesson of the story. Wisdom does not always come from gaining more. Like the cup that emptied itself, peace arrives when we create space for it, when we let go of what we think we know and allow stillness to pour in. The Bell Tower and the Moon. In the heart of a misty mountain village stood a tall, slender bell tower beside an old temple. The villagers said the bell had not rung in years, yet no one ever dared remove it. It was cracked along one edge, and its sound had once echoed too deeply. Some said it stirred the heart too much, made people feel things they couldn't explain. So they let it be, watching it in silence as it hung like a question in the sky. Each night, the moon rose behind the tower, casting long shadows across the village square, and each night, a young girl named Rani would climb to the top and sit quietly beneath the bell, legs dangling, her eyes always turned toward the sky. She was no monk, no scholar, just a child with too many questions and not enough answers. She had lost her mother in the last monsoon, and while people spoke gently to her, nothing eased the ache inside her chest. Words felt too loud, too far from the truth. So she came to the tower, night after night, to sit in the company of the moon and the bell that never rang. One night, as the moon rose full and low, Rani leaned against the bell and whispered, "Why do you stay silent?" Her voice was soft, not expecting an answer, but the wind stirred. The bell swayed gently, and for the first time in many years, it rang. Not loud, not sharp, just one soft, hollow note that echoed into the valley like a sigh held for too long. Rani sat still, her heart suddenly quiet. Not heavy, not light, just open. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed in the sound. And for the first time since her mother's passing, she felt the space around her wasn't empty. It was full of something she couldn't name: grief, love, presence, all folded together like clouds around the moon. She stayed until the stars blinked awake and the bell fell silent once more. Lesson of the story: some truths can't be spoken, only felt. Like the bell that rings once beneath the moon, moments of quiet connection can echo deeper than words, reminding us that even in silence, we are never truly alone. The story hidden in a rice grain. In a humble village nestled between rolling hills and golden fields, the monks of a small monastery lived in quiet simplicity. Their meals were modest, mostly rice, vegetables, and whatever offerings the villagers brought. Each morning, the monks would walk barefoot through the dirt paths, bowls in hand, receiving a handful of food here, a smile there, and always gratitude in silence. Among them was a novice named Lani, young and eager to learn. She worked hard, meditated with focus, and recited sutras until her voice grew hoarse. But inside, she felt a constant need to do more, to prove her worth, to find some great insight that would change her forever. One day, as she helped prepare the midday meal, she stared at the pot of rice boiling on the stove and sighed. "Is this it?" she whispered. "Just rice, just chores, just silence? Where is the great truth I came here for?" Her teacher, Venerable Toma, overheard her and walked over. He picked up a single grain of uncooked rice from the table and placed it in her hand. "Look closely," he said. Lani frowned, but obeyed. The grain was smooth, small, almost nothing, just a speck of food. What was there to see? "This grain," he said gently, "was born from sun and rain. It grew through weeks of wind, bending without breaking. A farmer woke before dawn to plant it, another to harvest. It rode in baskets, crossed rivers, passed through hands that never knew your name, and now it rests in your palm." Lani's hand trembled slightly. "You want to find some great truth," he said. But truth isn't hiding in distant places or difficult teachings. Sometimes it's right here, in something so small, so quiet, you miss it while reaching for more. That day, she ate slowly. Each bite felt full of effort, of life, of interconnection, and she began to see the sacred isn't far away. It's already here, even in a grain of rice. Lesson of the story: truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's hidden in the smallest things, like a grain of rice carrying the whole world within it. When we stop looking far away, we begin to see that everything is already teaching us. The traveler who slept by the river. There was a river that wound through the countryside like a silver thread, flowing gently between forests and fields. It carried stories in its current, of birth, of loss, of quiet change. Those who traveled far often found their way to its banks, drawn not by a destination, but by the sound of water smoothing stone. One such traveler was a man named Varun. He had been walking for many months, his heart heavy with a sadness he could not name. He had lost no one recently, suffered no great disaster, yet he carried a weight as real as any storm. He had tried to outrun it through cities, across mountains, along dusty roads, but it always followed, a quiet ache just behind his breath. One evening, with the sun dipping below the trees and no village in sight, Varun came to the edge of the river. Too tired to continue, he laid down beside it, using his pack as a pillow. He didn't build a fire or speak a word. He simply listened. The water moved beside him, slow and steady, whispering over smooth stones. It had no urgency, no goal. It didn't ask where it was going. It simply flowed. For a long time, Varun watched the surface, how it caught the light of the fading sky. He followed the movement until his thoughts began to slow, until the tightness in his chest softened with every ripple. That night, beneath a sky full of stars, Varun fell asleep, not with the restless mind that usually kept him awake, but with the quiet trust of someone held by something much older than sorrow. He woke at dawn to birdsong and soft mist rising from the river. The ache in his heart was not gone, but it had changed. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a story, one he could carry without being broken. He dipped his hands into the river and whispered, "Thank you," though he wasn't sure to whom. Lesson of the story: sometimes healing doesn't arrive in answers or action. It arrives in rest. Like the traveler who slept by the river, we find peace not by escaping our pain, but by laying it down beside something steady, something that simply flows. The butterfly's gentle bow. In the heart of a lush valley, where wildflowers painted the hills and the air carried the scent of jasmine and rain, there stood a tiny hermitage known only to a few. It was not grand, just a wooden bench beneath a tree, a single lantern, and a garden where nature moved without hurry. Here lived a solitary monk named Mira. She had once lived in a large monastery, known for her wisdom and discipline. But over time, she realized she wasn't seeking answers anymore. She was seeking quiet. So she came to the valley, not to teach, not to preach, but simply to be still. Each morning, Mira would sit among the flowers, sipping tea and watching the world wake up. Bees humming, petals opening, dew sliding slowly from blades of grass. She believed every day had its own lesson. if one listened gently enough. One morning, as she sat in her usual spot, a butterfly drifted into the garden. Its wings were soft blue with faint white patterns, delicate, like breath. It fluttered lightly through the air, then landed on a stone in front of her. For a moment, it was perfectly still. Then, ever so gently, it lowered its tiny body toward the stone. Just a small dip, a movement so subtle it could almost be missed. Mira smiled. A bow, she thought, not to her, not for show, but as if the butterfly was honoring the moment, the morning, the stone, its own fragile existence. And just like that, it rose again and flew on. That single graceful movement stayed with Mira all day. It was more moving than sermons, deeper than words. That tiny bow carried no effort, no ego. It was just a quiet part of life's rhythm, natural, honest, unforced. She thought of how often people bowed out of habit or expectation, but this butterfly had reminded her of something far greater. Reverence can live in the softest motion, in breath, in awareness, in simply showing up fully for the world. That evening, before sleep, Mira bowed too, not to anyone, but to the day, to the silence, to the lesson carried on soft wings. Lesson of the story. Respect does not need ceremony. Like the butterfly's gentle bow, true reverence is quiet, humble, and full of presence. In stillness, every moment becomes sacred. The monk who dreamed in color. In a quiet monastery nestled between green hills and soft clouds, there lived a monk named Tenzin who was known for his silence. While the other monks chanted and studied, Tenzin preferred to sit alone in the meditation hall, eyes closed, breath steady, hands resting like still water in his lap. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were soft and kind, like petals falling on a still pond. Many believed he had reached a deep state of peace, his face always calm, his presence like cool shade on a hot day. But Tenzin carried a secret. Each night when he slept, he dreamed, not of temples or teachings, but of color. Vivid, radiant color. In his dreams, he wandered through fields of golden wind, sat beneath trees with leaves the color of laughter, and watched rivers made of sapphire and fire flow upward into stars. He dreamed of people he had never met, places he had never seen, and sounds that made his chest ache without knowing why. He saw joy, sorrow, love, and grief swirl together in colors so rich they made him cry in his sleep. And when he awoke, he remembered it all, but told no one. He believed monks were meant to let go of dreams, not live inside them. One morning, an elder monk noticed Tenzin lingering after meditation, a quiet look in his eyes. "What is it you see when your eyes are closed?" the elder asked. Tenzin hesitated, then finally said, "I dream in color, more than I've ever seen in waking life." The elder nodded slowly. "And does it disturb your peace?" "No," Tenzin whispered. "It fills it." The elder smiled. "Then it is not illusion, it is teaching." From that day forward, Tenzin stopped fearing his dreams. He began to paint with natural dyes and crushed leaves, not to impress, but to express, to honor what his heart held in sleep. He painted not with rules, but with feeling, each stroke a prayer, each hue a breath. The walls of the meditation hall slowly filled with color, and the silence within grew even deeper. Lesson of the story. Not all dreams are distractions. Some are reminders of beauty we've forgotten to feel. Like the monk who dreamed in color, we learn that what stirs the heart can also awaken the soul, if we have the courage to listen. The path between thoughts. At the edge of an old forest, where moss grew thick and the trees whispered ancient songs, there was a trail few people ever walked. It wasn't marked on any map. It wound gently between stones, dipped through shaded glens, and disappeared into silence. The monks at the nearby temple called it the path between thoughts, though no one had ever explained why. A novice named Laia, thoughtful and full of questions, was drawn to it. She had been struggling in her practice. Her breath would settle, but her mind would not. Thoughts came like waves, memories, worries, ideas, regrets. She chased stillness like a bird she couldn't catch. One morning, weary from trying, she approached her teacher, a soft-spoken monk named Kema. "Why can't I quiet my mind?" Laia asked. "I follow the breath. I sit for hours, but the thoughts never stop." Kema handed her a walking stick and simply said, "Go to the path. Walk until you no longer ask." Confused but trusting, Laia bowed and made her way into the forest. She found the trail easily, as if it had been waiting for her. The forest was alive with sounds, branches creaking, birds calling, leaves falling. She began walking, not fast, not slow, just walking. At first, her mind kept speaking. "You're doing this wrong. You should be meditating. You should be still." But the forest didn't mind her thoughts. It didn't ask her to stop them. It only asked her to keep moving. Step, breath, step, breath. Then something happened, not all at once, but gradually. She noticed her thoughts, but they didn't pull her. They passed like clouds drifting across a wide sky. Between them, there was space, soft, clear space. And within that space, she felt something gentle rise, a stillness, not forced, not chased, but found. She kept walking, not to get anywhere, but to stay here, to stay within that space where the noise softened and peace stepped forward, like a friend who had always been near. When she returned to the temple at sunset, she didn't say anything. She simply sat. And for the first time, the silence wasn't something she reached for. It was something she had entered. Lesson of the story. Peace is not found by forcing silence. Like the path between thoughts, stillness reveals itself when we stop chasing it and simply walk through the space it leaves behind. The turtle who understood time. In a warm, quiet pond on the edge of a thick jungle lived an old turtle named Bhumi. His shell was faded with age, his steps slow, his eyes full of patience. While other animals rushed through their days, Bhumi moved like the earth itself, unhurried, steady, never needing to arrive anywhere quickly. Many of the younger creatures laughed at him. "You'll miss everything," the squirrel shouted as it raced past. "You're always late," called the dragonfly, its wings a blur. But Bhumi never answered with anger. He only smiled, blinked slowly, and kept moving, one step, one breath, one moment at a time. One morning, a young fox came to the pond in frustration. He had tried to do everything quickly, hunt, build, learn, but nothing seemed to work. His mind buzzed with plans and regrets and what-ifs. "I'm wasting time," he growled, pacing at the water's edge. "I'm running out of it." Bhumi raised his head and said gently, "Then sit." The fox paused, surprised. "Sit?" he asked. "How will that help?" Bhumi didn't explain. He simply gestured with his eyes to the space beside him. So the fox sat. The pond was still. The sky was soft. A dragonfly passed slowly this time, and the sun made patterns on the water. "Do you know how old I am?" Bhumi asked after a while. The fox shook his head. "I stopped counting," said the turtle, "because I stopped chasing time, and when I did, I began to feel it." The fox looked confused. Bhumi continued. "Time is not something to catch or lose. It's not behind you or ahead of you. It's only here, now. If you're always trying to hold it, it slips away. But if you sit with it, it becomes yours." The fox didn't reply. He just stared at the pond, and for the first time noticed the way the water shimmered, the sound of the wind in the trees, the slow rhythm of his own breath. He stayed longer than he meant to, and when he finally rose to leave, he didn't run. He walked. Lesson of the story: time isn't something to race, it's something to feel. Like the turtle who understood time, we find peace not by doing more, but by being fully present. In stillness, time opens, not as pressure, but as a gift. The rice field of gratitude. In a wide, open valley where the sky seemed to stretch forever, there lay a simple rice field that fed an entire village. The earth was soft, the water slow and warm, and the seasons moved like breath, gentle, patient, without rush. Monks from a nearby temple tended the field each day, not as farmers, but as a form of practice. Among them was an older monk named Sora. He had tilled that soil for more than 30 years. His back was bent, his hands rough, yet his eyes were always bright. Younger monks often wondered why he never complained. The sun was harsh, the work endless, and the mud clung to everything. But Sora always walked into the field barefoot, smiling as if stepping into sacred ground. One day, a young monk named Ren finally asked him, "How can you smile like that every day in this same field? Doesn't it tire you?" Sora paused, standing knee-deep in water, a small seedling in his hand. "I don't work this field because I must," he said softly. "I work it because it reminds me." "Reminds you of what?" Ren asked. Sora placed the seedling gently into the mud, pressing it down with care. "Of everything I've been given." He looked out across the green shoots swaying in the wind. "This rice is not just food. It's rain from the sky. It's sun on my skin. It's the strength of my legs, the kindness of those who brought the seeds, the silence that lets them grow. I bow to the field, not because it asks me to, but because it teaches me how to see." Ren looked down at his own hands, calloused from days of labor. He had seen the work as a chore. He had missed the quiet miracle of it all. That evening, as they left the field, Ren bowed, not to the sky or to the temple, but to the mud on his feet and the aching in his arms. He understood now. The work was not the obstacle. It was the offering. Lesson of the story: gratitude doesn't wait for ease. Like the rice field that feeds many, it grows when we see the sacred in the ordinary. Peace comes not from what we receive, but from how deeply we recognize what's already been given. The smile beneath the Bodhi tree. In Bodh Gaya, where the sacred tree casts its ancient shade, there is a soft spot on the earth where many believe the Buddha once sat in stillness, waiting not for answers, but for truth to unfold naturally, like a lotus in warm light. Pilgrims from every corner of the world come to that place. Some weep, some chant, some sit in silence, but all of them search. Among the travelers one season was a woman named Anya. She had faced loss after loss, her mother, her home, her sense of direction. She carried with her a heavy heart and 1,000 questions with no words to hold them. She sat beneath the Bodhi tree with the others, hoping for something. A sign, a vision, a moment of peace. But her mind only offered pain. Her breath felt tight, her eyes full of things she could not name. Nearby sat a monk, quiet and still, eyes half closed. He looked ordinary, almost forgettable, except for one thing, a faint smile, not wide, not forced, just gentle, soft, unshaken. Anya watched him for a long time. She began to wonder, what does he know that I don't? Why does he smile when there is so much to carry in this world? Finally, unable to resist, she whispered, "Excuse me, why are you smiling?" The monk opened his eyes. He looked at her, not with answers, but with presence. "Because," he said quietly, "I have stopped trying to escape." Anya's throat tightened. "I still feel pain," he said. "I still grieve, still remember. But beneath all of it is a space that doesn't move. And in that space, there is a smile, not for what is happening, but for what is always here." They sat together beneath the leaves, sunlight flickering through the branches. Anya did not find all the peace she hoped for, but she felt, for the first time in a long time, a stillness that did not ask her to be anyone else, and without knowing why, she smiled too. Lesson of the story. Peace doesn't mean having no pain. Like the smile beneath the Bodhi tree, it rises from the stillness within, the part of us that doesn't need to run, fix, or fear. It simply is. The gentle hands of the healer. In a quiet mountain village surrounded by soft mists and tall cedar trees, there lived a healer named Anju. She wasn't a monk, nor did she speak much of the Dharma, but the villagers often said she carried peace in her hands. When people were sick, they came to her. When grief weighed too heavy, they sat in her garden. And when someone felt broken in ways words could not touch, they left her home a little lighter, though they never knew exactly why. Her methods were simple: herbs, warm broth, silence, and touch. She rarely spoke while treating people. Instead, she listened with her whole presence, her hands moving slowly, softly, as if afraid to disturb the pain, but unafraid to face it. One day, a young man named Riku arrived at her door. He wasn't sick in body, but his heart ached. His father had died months before, and though he smiled and worked and bowed at the temple, something inside him remained heavy, hollow, and tight. "I don't know what I need," he whispered. Anju only nodded and led him to a small room filled with morning light. She motioned for him to sit. Then she brought a bowl of warm water and a cloth. Without a word, she placed his hands into hers and began to wash them gently. It felt strange at first, too simple, too quiet. But the warmth of the water, the rhythm of her movements, the steadiness of her touch began to soften something inside him. He didn't have to explain his grief. He didn't have to be strong. He didn't have to do anything. A tear fell, then another. Anju didn't flinch. She continued washing his hands as if they were something sacred. When it was done, she dried them with care, placed them back in his lap, and bowed once, deeply. Riku left without answers, but with a heart that felt less alone. Lesson of the story. Healing doesn't always come through words or wisdom. Sometimes it arrives through presence. Like the gentle hands of the healer, peace often begins in small, quiet acts of care, where we feel seen without needing to be fixed. The meditation of the stars. Far beyond the temple walls, where the hills rolled into the horizon and the night sky stretched wide and endless, there was a quiet plateau known by the monks as the sleeping sky. It was a place where few sounds reached, no footsteps, no bells, not even the rustling of wind through trees. Only the breath of the earth and the stars. A young monk named Keshi came to this place often. He struggled not with noise, but with silence. In the quiet, his thoughts grew louder. Doubts crept in, questions about his path, his worth, his purpose. Even when the world around him was still, his mind raced like a stream after heavy rain. One night, seeking peace, he climbed the plateau alone. He laid out his mat on the cold stone and lay back, eyes open to the sky. Above him, the stars blinked, soft and unhurried, scattered across the darkness like notes on a silent page. He stared for hours. No teaching came. No voice whispered answers. The stars did not explain themselves, but they also did not rush. They simply remained. He began to notice their rhythm, not one of movement, but of being. The stars did not try to shine. They just did. They didn't compare or fight or reach. They were not trying to get somewhere else. They simply were. Keshi breathed slowly. His thoughts still came, but they felt smaller now, held in something vast. He let them pass like clouds over the galaxy of his mind. The longer he watched, the more he felt it. Not a lesson, but a remembering. That he too was made of stillness. That he too belonged to the night sky, not separate, not lost, just part of it all. No one heard the silence he entered that night. But when he returned to the temple in the morning, he moved differently. Not faster, not slower, but more present. As though something inside him had finally aligned with something far, far above. Lesson of the story. We don't have to understand everything to find peace. Like the stars in meditation, stillness comes when we stop trying to solve the night and simply sit beneath it and shine. The bird that sang only once. In a hidden valley cradled by mountains and mist, the monks of a quiet monastery lived with few possessions and many moments of stillness. The days flowed gently from one to the next, marked not by clocks or bells, but by breath, by wind, by the changing color of the sky. It was a place where silence was not empty, but full of listening. Each morning, the monks would sit in the garden to meditate. No words, no chanting, only the sounds of the earth awakening. And on one such morning, just as the sun crested the hilltops and lit the leaves with gold, a sound broke the silence. A single, hauntingly beautiful song filled the air. It came from a tree near the garden gate. A small, pale bird, with feathers like silver frost, perched quietly among the branches. Its song was unlike anything the monks had ever heard. Soft, trembling, perfectly clear. The sound held something ancient in it, something sorrowful and at the same time filled with light. The monks all looked up, but just as quickly as it began, the bird stopped singing. It spread its wings and flew off into the morning sky, disappearing beyond the trees. The next day, they waited. No song. The day after, the same. Weeks passed. The bird never returned. Some monks spoke of it with awe. Others said it must have been a dream. But one elder monk, named Hanu, simply smiled when asked about it. "That bird sang only once," he said, "but that was enough." A younger monk frowned. But why would something so beautiful come only once and never again? Hanu looked to the sky. Because not everything is meant to stay. Some things come just to remind us, to be present, to hear, to feel, not to possess. The monks never heard the bird again. But the silence that followed felt deeper than before, as if the song had never truly left, but had moved inside them. Lesson of the story. Some moments are not meant to last. They are meant to awaken. Like the bird that sang only once, beauty can be brief but unforgettable. When we stop grasping, we begin to truly receive. The garden with no gate. On the far edge of a quiet forest, beyond a trail that curved through wildflowers and tall grass, there was a garden known only to those who stopped searching. It had no walls, no sign, and no gate, just a path that slowly disappeared into stillness. The monks of the nearby temple called it the garden with no gate, and they rarely spoke of it. Not because it was secret, but because words could not explain what it gave. One morning, a young seeker named Rami arrived at the temple, tired from years of looking. He had traveled far, studied under many teachers, and filled notebooks with thoughts, mantras, and teachings. Yet peace still escaped him, like mist slipping through fingers. He asked the head monk, "Where is the place of awakening? Where do I go to finally enter peace?" The monk smiled and handed him a cup of tea. "When you stop trying to enter, you may already be inside." Rami frowned, unsure whether it was an answer or a riddle. Later that day, while wandering through the woods to clear his thoughts, he stumbled onto a path he hadn't noticed before. It was quiet, unmarked, drawn only by time and footsteps. Something in him softened, and he followed it. Soon, the trees opened up into a clearing. There were no gates, no fences, no signs that said, "Here it is." But the air felt lighter. Birds moved gently among low branches. Wind brushed across the tall grass. In the center stood a single bench, and beyond it, nothing but sky and open earth. Rami sat down, breath deepening without effort. His mind, so used to searching, asking, and reaching, stopped. He realized he didn't need to get anywhere. There was no door to unlock, no entrance to cross. He was already in the garden, and it had never been closed. Not once. He stayed for hours, not meditating, not analyzing, just being. The stillness didn't explain itself. It didn't need to. It simply welcomed him home. Lesson of the story. The peace we seek is not behind a gate. Like the garden with no entrance, true stillness reveals itself when we stop searching for it elsewhere and realize we've already arrived. The tree that forgot to die. In a dry valley where rain had not fallen for many seasons, there stood an old tree, twisted, cracked, and leafless. Travelers called it the ghost tree, for it had long stopped blooming, and yet it refused to fall. Its bark was worn, its limbs bent like tired arms, but it remained upright, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Monks from a nearby temple often walked past it on their way to the river, offering a quiet bow out of respect. But to most others, it was just a dead thing that had forgotten to lie down. One day, a young monk named Aya paused beneath its branches. She had been feeling lost, worn from inner battles she couldn't name, her heart filled with doubt, her spirit dry like the earth around her. She looked at the tree and saw something of herself in it, standing but tired, present but empty. She sat in its shade, though the tree gave no real shelter. The sun filtered through bare branches. A gentle wind passed, and something shifted, not in the air, but in her attention. She noticed tiny green shoots at the base of the trunk. Not many, just a few, clinging to the cracked roots, trembling in the breeze. The tree, she realized, was not dead. It had not blossomed like the others. It bore no fruit, but deep inside, it had held on, quietly, patiently, without demand. Aya bowed her head, not out of sorrow, but out of understanding. She had come expecting to see something that had given up, but instead, she had found something enduring. The tree had no need to appear strong, no desire to prove life. It simply was, still rooted, still waiting, still alive in ways the eye could not measure. Aya returned often, not to look for change, but to sit in the presence of quiet survival. The tree didn't offer beauty or wisdom. It offered something rarer, the truth that even when all seems lost, something within us may still be growing. Lesson of the story. Not all strength is loud. Like the tree that forgot to die, resilience often lives in stillness, rooted deep, blooming in secret, waiting for the right season to begin again. The whisper in the sutras. In a dimly lit library, deep within a mountain monastery, shelves of ancient sutras lined the walls like silent guardians. Some scrolls were golden with age, their corners soft from decades of fingers turning pages. Others had never been opened, wrapped still in silk and tied with faded red string. The room always smelled of sandalwood and thyme. A novice named Suri came there each night after chores, eager to uncover the great truths hidden in the words of the Buddha. She read for hours, chanting softly, tracing each character with care, memorizing verses with determination. But no matter how many she studied, she felt something was missing. "I read the sutras," she confessed to the elder monk, Master Teijin, "but my mind is still unsettled. I understand the words, but peace still feels far away." Teijin looked at her with a gaze that held no judgment. He led her into the library and pointed to a dusty scroll on the lowest shelf. "This sutra," he said, "was copied by a monk who never spoke. He wrote it not to be read, but to be remembered through silence." Suri unrolled it. There were no markings, just faint brushstrokes, barely visible, lines so soft they could be mistaken for shadows. She looked up, puzzled. "There's nothing here," she said. Taejin nodded. "Not nothing, just quiet." He believed the truest teaching is what we hear between the words. That night, Suri returned alone. She sat cross-legged before the scroll, lit a single candle, and did not read. She only listened, not with her ears, but with her breath, with her heart. In the silence of that room, surrounded by sacred texts, she began to hear something soft, softer than thought. A whisper not made of language. A knowing that didn't explain, but comforted. Like the way a mother soothes without speaking, or the way the wind carries peace without direction. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from stillness. She finally understood some truths are not meant to be spoken, only felt. Lesson of the story. Not all wisdom comes through words. Like the whisper in the sutras, true understanding often arrives in silence, when the mind becomes quiet enough to hear what the heart has always known. The pup who watched the Dharma. In a modest monastery nestled between rolling fields and winding paths, a stray pup wandered in one morning during the monk's walking meditation. He was small, scruffy, and curious, his ears too big for his head, his paws clumsy on the stone floors. No one had the heart to turn him away. The monks called him Tashi. At first, Tashi followed them everywhere, sniffing robes, chasing his tail, barking at birds. But soon, something changed. During the morning sits, Tashi would find his place at the doorway of the meditation hall. He would curl into a ball and grow still, ears perked, eyes half closed, watching in silence. He never barked during meditation. He never wandered off. He simply sat, day after day, as if the stillness itself had touched some gentle place inside him. A young monk named Pema grew especially fond of him. He noticed that whenever he struggled with thoughts or restlessness, the pup's quiet presence helped him feel grounded again. One afternoon, during a stormy meditation session filled with thunder outside and noise in his head, Pema opened his eyes and saw Tashi sitting upright, watching him with soft, steady eyes. It wasn't a gaze that asked for anything. It was just there, open, present, accepting. After the sit, Pema went to the elder monk, Master Rin, and asked, "Why does the pup seem so peaceful? He doesn't know the Dharma. He hasn't heard a single teaching." Master Rin smiled, setting his tea down. He watches without judgment. He listens without trying to fix. He simply is. Pema nodded slowly. "So, is he practicing the Dharma?" "No," Master Rin said. "He is the Dharma." The pup never gave teachings. He never asked questions. But he reminded the monks of something easy to forget. Peace isn't only found in knowledge or effort. It's found in presence, in being completely here, without wanting the moment to be different. From that day on, the monks treated Tashi not as a stray, but as a teacher, one whose lessons were silent, simple, and always waiting at the door. Lesson of the story: the deepest wisdom needs no words. Like the pup who watched the Dharma, true presence is quiet, accepting, and full of peace. Sometimes, the gentlest beings show us the clearest path. The moment before the bell. Each morning at the monastery, before the sun rose above the treetops, the monks gathered in the meditation hall, seated in a perfect circle around the great bronze bell. Its surface was worn smooth by the years, and its deep voice marked the beginning of every practice, every breath, every still moment that would follow. A young monk named Nilan had been at the monastery for only a few weeks. He struggled with restlessness, his body tense, his thoughts wild. Every time the bell rang, it startled him. He would flinch, even though he expected it. Then, as silence settled in, he would spend the meditation wondering why he couldn't feel the peace the others seemed to find so easily. One morning before the first bell, he approached the temple elder, Master Rin. "Why does the bell unsettle me?" Nilan asked. "I come here to find calm, but the sound only reminds me how far I am from it." Master Rin looked toward the bell. The hall was still empty. The air held the cool hush of dawn. "Perhaps," he said softly, "you are listening only to the sound. But have you ever listened to the moment before it rings?" Nilan frowned. "Come," Rin said, and gestured for him to sit near the bell. They sat in silence together, the bell between them. The monk assigned to strike it had not yet arrived. The hall was utterly quiet. No chants, no footsteps, no movement. And in that space, Nilan noticed something he never had before. The stillness was not empty. It was full of breath, of presence, of something ancient and vast. It was like the whole world paused, listening with him, waiting without hurry, not anxious, not urgent, just ready. Then the bell rang. But this time the sound didn't startle him. It felt like a natural unfolding, an answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. And suddenly, he understood. The bell was never the beginning. The beginning was the stillness before it, the quiet space where peace had already arrived. Lesson of the story. Sometimes the deepest peace is not found in sound or silence, but in the space that lives just before both. Like the moment before the bell, calm is already there, if we're willing to pause and truly listen. The light in the lotus pond. At the edge of a forest monastery, there was a wide lotus pond that shimmered beneath the morning sun and glowed beneath the stars. In the still water, dozens of lotus flowers floated, some in full bloom, some still closed, some just breaking through the surface of the mud. The monks tended the pond with care, but they did not touch the flowers. They only sat beside them during evening meditation, letting the quiet ripples mirror the quiet inside themselves. Among the monks was a young nun named Sema. She had arrived carrying much sorrow, wounds from a past she rarely spoke about, and questions about why life could be both beautiful and painful in the same breath. Each day, she worked hard to learn the teachings, to sit longer, to breathe more deeply, but still peace felt distant. One evening, as dusk folded gently into night, Sema sat alone by the pond. The moon had risen, and the lotuses glowed pale in its light, their reflections dancing in the water. She stared into the pond, her thoughts churning quietly beneath her still posture. Why do I still feel so much pain? Why can't I rise above it like the others seem to? Then, as she leaned closer, she saw something. One lotus near the far edge had bloomed just slightly, revealing a tiny light inside. Not the moon's reflection, not fire, but something soft, warm and golden, pulsing from its center. It was faint, barely there, but real. Sema blinked. The light didn't fade. She sat frozen, breath slowing, and in that moment she realized this lotus had grown through mud, darkness, and still water. It had not fought the mud, it had needed it. And now, from the center of all that rising and waiting, it held a quiet light of its own. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from deep knowing. She didn't need to be free of her past. She didn't need to rise above her pain. She needed to bloom through it. Like the lotus, lesson of the story, we do not have to escape the darkness to find light. Like the lotus that rises through the mud, our deepest peace often grows from what we've endured and glows quietly from within. The Shoeless Wanderer. In a dusty village nestled along a trade road, people spoke of a strange figure who passed through once every few seasons. He wore no shoes, carried no bag, and spoke only when spoken to. His robes were faded, his feet calloused, and his eyes, soft and bright, seemed to hold more sky than sorrow. They called him the Shoeless Wanderer. No one knew where he came from or where he was going. He would appear at the edge of town, walking slowly, step by step, as if each movement was part of a prayer. He never asked for food, but it was always offered. He never preached, but people often felt lighter after simply watching him walk. One summer, a curious boy named Raju followed him, at first from a distance, then closer, until finally he ran up beside him. "Why don't you wear shoes?" Raju asked. "The road is hot. There are stones. It must hurt." The wanderer looked down at his bare feet and smiled. "It does sometimes," he said. "Then why not protect them?" He paused, then replied, "Because I want to feel where I am." Raju didn't understand. "But doesn't pain make the journey harder?" The wanderer stopped walking. They stood together in the quiet hum of cicadas and wind. "Pain is not always the enemy," he said. "It reminds me I am here. Each stone I step on teaches me where I place my weight. Each thorn slows me down. Without shoes, I cannot rush. I walk with care. I feel the earth." He knelt down and picked up a small pebble. Most people move so fast. They forget they're walking. Their feet are always trying to arrive, but their hearts are never present. He placed the pebble back and stood. "I don't walk to reach a place," he said softly. "I walk to be here." Raju didn't follow him much farther, but he never forgot those words. Years later, whenever life felt too fast, he would take off his shoes and walk through the fields near his home, one step at a time, returning to himself. Lesson of the story: peace isn't always found in comfort. Like the shoeless wanderer, we find presence not by avoiding the hard parts of the path, but by feeling them fully and walking anyway. The bowl that caught the sky. In a small village resting beneath endless open skies, a wandering monk named Kalen arrived one evening with nothing but a staff and an old clay alms bowl. He was quiet, gentle, and walked as if the earth beneath his feet were sacred. The villagers welcomed him with warmth, offering him a space near the temple to rest and a place at their table to eat. But Kalen rarely stayed indoors. Instead, he spent his time under the sky, sitting in the fields, walking along the river, or lying in the grass, his bowl resting beside him. Children would often follow him, curious. "Why do you carry that bowl everywhere?" one asked. Kalen smiled. "To catch the sky." They laughed. "The sky can't fit in a bowl." But Kalen only smiled again. "It already has." One morning, after a night of heavy rain, a little boy named Jory found Kalen sitting under a tree, the bowl placed carefully on the grass in front of him. Rainwater had collected inside it. The surface was still, and in it the entire sky was reflected. Clouds drifting, sun rising, birds flying across the curved horizon within the bowl's shallow rim. Jory stared, wide-eyed. "It's the sky. It's really in there." Kalen nodded gently. "When the bowl is still, it reflects everything. But if you stir the water, then the sky disappears." Jory was quiet for a moment. "Is that what meditation is for?" Kalen looked at the boy with warm eyes. "Yes, when the mind is calm, like this water, it reflects the truth, not just the sky, but the whole world, without distortion." He picked up the bowl and poured the water slowly into the soil. "We don't hold on to the sky," he said. "We honor its reflection, and we carry that stillness with us." That day, Jory sat beside Kalen in silence for the first time, his small hands resting in his lap, his breath slow and steady. He didn't understand everything, but he had seen the sky inside a bowl, and something inside him had grown quiet. Lesson of the story: clarity comes not from holding more, but from stillness. Like the bowl that caught the sky, our mind becomes clear when we stop stirring it, and in that quiet, the whole world is reflected within. The sunset at Dharma Hill. Beyond the monastery walls, where the chanting of monks faded into birdsong and wind, there was a gentle hill known to all as Dharma Hill. It wasn't high or grand, but from its grassy top you could see the entire valley unfold. Rivers gliding like threads of silk, trees swaying like they were breathing, and the sky stretching wider than any thought could reach. At the end of each day, the monks would often climb the hill in silence to watch the sun set. It was not a rule, it was simply what happened, like flowers turning toward the light or dew falling before dawn. No one spoke, no one instructed. It was just understood. This was the place where the day bowed out gently, and where the mind could learn to do the same. A young monk named Sonar had trouble letting go of the day. He carried conversations long after they ended, replayed small mistakes, held tightly to feelings that should have passed. Each sunset brought him sadness, not peace. He saw the light leaving and felt something slipping away. Another chance, another moment, gone. One evening, the elder monk Jorin noticed Sona sitting at the edge of the hill, eyes heavy with longing. "Why do you grieve the sunset?" Jorin asked softly. "Because it means the day is over," Sonar replied. "All that I didn't do, all that I should have done, it feels like a door closing." Jorin sat beside him. The sun hovered low, brushing the horizon with fire and gold. "But look," he said, "nothing is rushing. The sun does not fight to stay. The sky does not beg it to remain. The light simply fades, and the world softens into it. No regret, just return." Sonar watched more closely. The trees were glowing now, bathed in amber. Even the shadows seemed to bow. And for a moment, his heart let go. He didn't chase time. He didn't hold the day tighter. He just sat, breathing with the world as it exhaled. The sun dipped below the hill. The wind grew still. And in that fading light, Sonar finally understood. Letting go is not losing. It is loving something enough to release it. Lesson of the story. Peace comes not from holding on, but from allowing things to pass. Like the sunset at Dharma Hill, true stillness is found when we stop clinging to what's ending and learn to bow with grace to what has been. The thread of stillness. In a quiet village known for its weaving, everyone worked with their hands. Mothers passed their threadwork to daughters, elders told stories through patterns, and even the monks at the local temple wore robes dyed and stitched by the villagers themselves. But one loom stood apart from the rest. It belonged to an old weaver named Amma, who lived on the edge of town. Her cloths were simple, no gold, no bright colors, yet people said her fabrics brought peace. Just touching them made hearts soften and breath slow. No one knew why. One day, a young monk named Naren, overwhelmed by his own restless thoughts, asked to meet her. He found her at her loom, working quietly as afternoon light spilled across the floor. The air in her home was still, as if time moved slower within its walls. "Your cloth feels different," he said. "It brings a kind of calm. How do you make it that way?" Amma smiled and kept weaving. "I listen while I work," she said. "To what?" Naren asked. "To stillness." She paused, holding out the cloth she'd just woven. "Each thread has its own tension," she said. "If I pull too tight, it snaps. If I weave in haste, it tangles. So I match my breath to my hands, my mind to the rhythm. I wait for stillness inside me before I tie each knot." Naren touched the cloth. It was soft, steady, quiet, as if silence itself had been woven into it. He stayed and watched her weave for hours, the gentle click of wood and thread becoming a kind of meditation. There were no deep teachings spoken, just presence, just rhythm, just breath. That night, back at the temple, Naren sat to meditate. For the first time, he didn't fight his thoughts. He imagined them as threads, some tight, some loose, and simply breathed through the weaving of his own stillness. Lesson of the story: peace is not something we force, it's something we weave. Like the thread of stillness through fabric, calm is found by moving slowly, breathing gently, and letting the moment guide the pattern. The monk who planted quiet. In a village where the roads were always busy, the markets always loud, and the days always rushed, there came a monk who spoke very little and walked even slower. His name was Aru, and he arrived with no followers, no scrolls, no ceremony, just a small bag of seeds and a look in his eyes like still water. No one paid much attention to him at first. He didn't preach or ask for offerings. He simply found a piece of land near the edge of the village, cleared it with his hands, and began to plant. Not rice, not vegetables, but flowers, wild ones, gentle ones, ones that grew quietly and asked for nothing. Each morning, he watered the soil in silence. He sat among the dirt, listening to birds, to wind, to the sound of his own breath. Children would sometimes come and ask him questions, but he only smiled. Villagers would shake their heads and say, "He does nothing," but the garden grew. And slowly, something else began to grow with it. People started walking by just to watch. They began to speak softer near the flowers. The shopkeepers nearby found themselves pausing between customers, looking out at the petals moving gently in the breeze. Even the arguments that used to echo in the streets seemed to fade when people passed the garden. A merchant named Daya, tired from his travels and heavy with worry, approached Aru one day and asked, "What are you doing here, really?" Aru looked up and said simply, "Planting quiet." Daya frowned. "You mean peace?" "No," Aru replied, "just quiet. When the world is too loud, we forget who we are. But when we sit in quiet, even for a breath, the heart begins to remember." Daya didn't know what to say, so he sat down beside him, just for a moment. And in that moment, nothing changed, and everything did. The garden grew for many years. People began calling it the quiet field, but most simply called it his. Even after Aru was gone, the space remained. Still, gentle, alive. Lesson of the story: peace doesn't always come with words or answers. Like the monk who planted quiet, stillness grows when we make space for it. One breath, one step, one flower at a time. The elephant who let go. In the lowlands where the river met the forest, there lived an old elephant named Bantu. He had once been strong and proud, the leader of his herd, trusted and admired. But as years passed, his steps grew slower, his tusks dulled, and a younger elephant took his place. Bantu didn't resist. It was nature's way. But deep inside, something in him remained heavy. He wandered alone more often, not because he was cast out, but because he didn't know who he was anymore without the role he had carried for so long. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in gold and ash, Bantu came to the edge of a still lake. He looked into the water and saw his reflection, aged, quiet, unfamiliar. His ears drooped, his heart ached. What am I now? He wondered. If I am no longer who I used to be, then who am I? A soft voice broke the silence. You are exactly where you need to be. It was a monk from the nearby forest temple, sitting on a flat stone by the lake. He had come there often, and Bantu had seen him before, always still, always calm, never intruding. I used to be someone too, the monk said, smiling gently. A teacher, a son, a student. I tried to carry it all at once, until it became too heavy. Bantu looked at him, eyes deep and still. And then? The elephant seemed to ask. I let go, the monk said, not of memory, not of love, but of the need to keep being what I was, and in that letting go, I found peace. Bantu stood quietly by the lake as the monk bowed and left. The elephant stayed until the stars began to show. He watched his reflection again, not as something fading, but as something changing. That night, for the first time in years, he rested without trying to hold on. He didn't need to be who he had been. He didn't need to be anything more than here, breathing beneath the stars, with the earth still steady beneath his feet. Lesson of the story. Peace doesn't come from holding on to who we were. It comes from allowing ourselves to change. Like the elephant who let go, we find freedom not by clinging, but by trusting who we are becoming. The handprint in the sand. On the shore of a calm river that wound its way past temples and fields, there was a wide bank of soft sand where villagers came to wash clothes, collect water, or sit in the golden hush of sunset. The river always flowed slowly there, as if it, too, had learned to listen. A young monk named Elan often walked that shore in the early morning. He had recently entered the monastery and was filled with questions, all buzzing in his mind like bees behind a window. How do I let go of the past? How do I stop the thoughts that keep returning? How do I know if I am truly changing? Each morning, he asked these questions in his heart as he walked the water's edge, and each morning he found no answer. One day, the head monk, Venerable Suri, joined him. They walked in silence for a time, the wet sand cool beneath their feet. Then Suri stopped, knelt, and pressed his hand gently into the sand. His palm left a clear imprint, every line and finger marked in detail. He stood and waited. Elan watched as, slowly, the river crept forward. Small waves lapped against the shore. Bit by bit, the water touched the handprint, softening its edges, blurring its lines, until nothing remained but smooth sand once more. Suri turned to Elan. "This is how the mind works," he said. "Every experience leaves a mark. But if you don't keep touching it, don't keep pressing into it, the river of awareness will wash it clean." Elan's breath caught in his throat. "You don't need to force forgetting," Suri continued. "You only need to stop pressing your hand into the same memory, the same fear, again and again. Let the mind breathe. Let the water do what it knows how to do." They walked on. Elan no longer searched the river for answers. He simply watched it move. And within him, something began to soften too. Not vanish, but smooth. The weight of old thoughts became lighter, like footprints that the tide would soon carry away. Lesson of the story: healing doesn't always come from effort. Like the handprint in the sand, peace returns when we stop holding on and allow time, breath, and awareness to gently wash things clear. The star that paused for peace. Long ago, in a time before clocks and calendars, the sky was believed to be alive, not just with light, but with spirit. The elders in a quiet desert village told stories of stars that watched over the earth, each with a purpose. Some guided travelers, some marked seasons, but one, they said, carried something rare. It paused. The villagers called it Shanta, the peace star. They said that once every 100 years, Shanta would stop in the sky just for one night, not to shine brighter, not to perform a miracle, but simply to be still. And in that stillness, the whole world felt it. Even if only for a moment, people and animals alike would pause, hearts softening, breath slowing, silence wrapping everything like a warm shawl. Most thought it was only legend, but in a small temple near the edge of the dunes, a young monk named Leela believed. Each night she sat under the open sky, watching, not for signs or omens, but because something inside her needed to remember that peace was possible. One night, as the desert winds quieted and the horizon turned silver, she noticed it, a star that stopped. It didn't fall, it didn't move, it simply stayed, silent, steady, unmoving. Leela closed her eyes. Her thoughts softened like sand beneath water. The weight she had carried, the worries, the questions, the quiet grief she never voiced, suddenly loosened, not because anything had changed, but because she had paused too. And in that pause, there was peace, deep, gentle, true. She realized then that the star didn't bring peace by doing anything. It brought peace by not doing. By standing still in a world always spinning, it reminded those below that stillness was sacred, that nothing needed to happen for the heart to rest. The star moved again by dawn, but something had shifted in Leela. She no longer searched the sky for signs. She had seen what she needed to see. And now, each time she felt her mind race or her breath quicken, she simply paused, like the star, and remembered. Lesson of the story: peace doesn't always come through action. Like the star that paused for peace, stillness itself can be the light. When we stop rushing forward, even for a moment, we allow the calm that's already within us to rise and shine. The sound of one leaf falling. High in the mountains, where the air was thin and the trees reached toward the sky like long, quiet prayers, there stood a solitary temple. Around it grew an ancient forest, dense with pine and maple. The wind spoke softly there, and time passed as gently as the clouds that wrapped the peaks. A monk named Kien lived in the temple, known by few, visited by fewer. He spent his days sweeping stone paths, boiling tea, and sitting beneath a maple tree whose leaves turned gold before any others. He said little. Even when others spoke to him, his answers were brief, his silence somehow louder than words. One day, a traveler came to him, tired, full of thoughts, and hungry for something he couldn't name. "I've studied many teachings," the traveler said, "meditated for years, but my mind is still noisy. The silence never stays. It slips away the moment I reach for it." Kien simply nodded and motioned for him to sit beside him under the tree. They sat. Nothing happened. No chant, no question, no teaching. Just the quiet. And then, from above, a single golden leaf loosened from its branch and drifted down. It moved without hurry, spinning softly through the air before landing on the stone between them. The traveler looked at the leaf, expecting Kien to say something wise, but the monk only smiled, eyes still watching the sky. Minutes passed, and then the traveler understood. The leaf had fallen in perfect silence. It did not announce itself. It did not need to be heard. Its fall was its presence. Its stillness was its sound. And yet, it had reached him. He hadn't done anything. He had just been there, still enough to notice. A tear slipped down the traveler's cheek, not from sadness, but from the deep, unfamiliar feeling of arriving in the moment. No more searching, just being. Kien finally spoke. Most people wait for great truths with loud voices, but some truths come like a single leaf falling. Lesson of the story: peace doesn't always come with noise or effort. Like the sound of one leaf falling, stillness speaks when we are quiet enough to hear what has always been gently landing at our feet. The journey without footsteps. In a quiet village by the sea, there lived a monk named Rohan, who was known for never leaving the temple grounds. While other monks traveled far to teach, serve, or seek new understandings, Rohan stayed. Year after year, he swept the same courtyard, tended the same garden, and walked the same short path between the bell and the kitchen. Some villagers whispered that he was afraid to wander. Others said he had given up the search. One curious young traveler named Neva came to see him. She had been walking for months through mountains, deserts, and cities, hoping to find the wisdom that would finally bring her peace. She sat with Rohan in the garden, her pack heavy with journals and teachings from many places. "Why have you never left?" she asked. "Aren't you afraid of missing the truth?" Rohan smiled, not unkindly. He poured her a cup of tea, hands slow and careful, eyes full of light. "I've walked many paths," he said softly, "just not with my feet." Neva frowned. "I don't understand." He set the teapot down and pointed to the ground beneath them. "This stone," he said, "I've stepped over it 1,000 times, but one day I truly saw it, not as a stone, as silence, as stillness, as part of me. That was the beginning." He looked at her gently. "Every step you've taken has value, but there is another kind of journey, the one within, the one where you don't move through the world, but let the world move through you." Neva sat quietly. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the need to take the next step. She just listened, to the breeze in the trees, to the clinking of the teacup, to the stillness in her own chest that had always been there, waiting. She stayed for several days, not to learn more, but to unpack what she had carried, to walk without walking, to arrive without leaving. And when she finally departed, her bag was lighter, not because she had lost anything, but because she had begun to understand what could not be found by walking alone. Lesson of the story: not all journeys require movement. Like the journey without footsteps, peace is sometimes found not by going far, but by going deep, staying still, and arriving fully in the place you already are. The fire that didn't burn. In a dry and dusty land where the sun cracked the earth and winds carried stories across the plains, there stood a weathered monastery made of clay and stone. The monks who lived there were simple and enduring, like the land itself. They rose with the dawn, worked in silence, and welcomed all travelers, no matter how long they stayed or what they carried. One day, a man arrived from far away, wrapped in fine robes, but with tired eyes. His name was Arjan, a scholar of sacred texts. He had studied with masters, debated in temples, and written many books. But still, he carried a hidden fire within him, a fire of anger, pride, and questions that clawed at his peace. "I know the teachings," he told the head monk, "but I do not know rest. I feel something burning in me, always, even when I am still." The head monk, a quiet man named Sada, said only, "Come." He led Arjan to a fire pit outside the temple where a low flame danced. Around it were blackened stones and ash, signs of many long nights of reflection. Without a word, Sada sat beside the fire and motioned for Arjan to do the same. They sat. The flames flickered. The wind howled in the distance, but neither monk spoke. Arjan watched the fire closely, expecting a lesson to rise like smoke. Then Sada picked up a twig and slowly moved it toward the flame, but stopped just before it touched. The fire glowed, waiting. The twig hovered, unchanged. "Do you see?" Sada said softly. "It is not fire that burns. It is contact." Arjan stared. "The fire can warm or destroy," Sada continued. It can light the way or consume the path. The pain comes not from fire itself, but from grasping it, from refusing to let go. A long breath escaped Arjan's chest, one he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked into the fire again. This time it didn't feel dangerous. It felt alive, beautiful, even kind. That night, he sat beside the flames long after Sada had left, hands open, thoughts quiet. The fire danced, but it did not burn. Lesson of the story. Pain often comes not from what is, but from how tightly we hold it. Like the fire that didn't burn, peace comes when we stop clinging and learn to sit with life without reaching into its flames. As you drift gently into rest, let these stories stay with you, not as lessons to memorize, but as soft companions for the quiet corners of your heart. Each tale, from the whisper of a falling leaf to the silence between raindrops, carries a reminder. Peace is not far. It's already here, waiting in stillness, in breath, in presence. You don't need to chase it. You only need to listen. If one of these stories touched you deeply, or if a single image stayed with you, like a candle, a smile, or a single grain of rice, leave a comment below. Share the moment that opened something inside you. Your reflection might be the whisper someone else needs to hear. And if you'd like to journey further with us, into calm, into stories, into sleep, don't forget to subscribe. Let this space be your quiet home whenever the world feels loud. Until next time,